Welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. Wonderful to have you here today. We're truly grateful for your continued support. Tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? Big city? Small town? We'd love to know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Calculated Measures. Von Miller adjusted his tie as he surveyed the crowded ballroom, his reflection fragmenting in the crystal whiskey glass. The Washington Hilton glittered with military dress uniforms, gowns, and the subtle shimmer of power. 200 of the most influential figures in defense and politics mingled beneath ornate chandeliers, their laughter a counterpoint to the string quartet in the corner. Perfect timing. Defense Secretary Wilson approached, clapping Von's shoulder with practiced familiarity. Just signed off on the final paperwork this afternoon. $300 million for the Sentinel Defense Solutions cybersecurity package. Congratulations. Von nodded, his expression calibrated to display pleased professionalism rather than the triumph surging through him. The Pentagon made the right choice, Mr. Secretary. Our system will protect your networks from threats that don't even exist yet. Wilson leaned closer. Between us, your proposal destroyed the competition. The integration with existing infrastructure? Brilliant. Some of my analysts are still trying to figure out how you managed it. 15 years in Delta Force taught me to find entry points others miss, Von replied, his gaze drifting across the room to where his wife held court with 3 Air Force generals and a naval admiral. Layla's emerald dress complemented her auburn hair, her laughter carrying across the room as she touched the admiral's arm with practiced intimacy. Your wife certainly knows how to work a room, remarked Senator Holbrook, materializing beside him with a fresh cocktail. The senator's florid complexion suggested it wasn't his first. She's always been good at getting what she wants, Von responded with a tight smile, watching Layla extract a business card from one of the generals. 2 waiters stepped aside to create a direct line of sight between them. Layla caught his eye across the ballroom and raised her champagne flute in a private toast. After 12 years of marriage, her amber eyes still carried the magnetic pull that had drawn him in during that weapons conference in Dubai. Von lifted his glass in response, ignoring the slight tremor in his right hand. The trembling had started 3 months ago, subtle at first, but increasingly noticeable. He moved toward the bar, his stride deliberately measured to conceal the fatigue that had sapped his energy lately. A former special operator didn't show weakness, especially not at the pinnacle of his civilian success. Bourbon neat, he told the bartender, placing his empty glass on the counter. The slight tremor caused a drop of condensation to splash onto his hand. He discreetly wiped it away. You look tired, babe. Layla's voice carried the hint of her Georgia upbringing as she appeared beside him. She smelled of Chanel and champagne. Dr. Pierce said overexertion makes your symptoms worse. She extracted an amber pill bottle from her clutch, shaking a single white tablet into her palm before anyone could notice. Your medication. Von accepted the pill and the water she offered. Just a headache. You push yourself too hard. Her concern appeared genuine as she straightened his already perfect tie. The company won't collapse if you take a weekend off. He swallowed the pill, a flash of memory intruding, his Delta Force commander bleeding out in his arms in Belgrade, grabbing Von's collar with bloody fingers. Trust no one completely, the dying man had whispered, his final breath carrying the metallic scent of blood. Always have a backup plan. Sergeant Major Ramirez had saved Von's life 3 times before Belgrade. The 4th time, Von had failed to save his. Mr. Miller? A young waiter interrupted his thoughts. There's a call for you at the reception desk. They say it's Westridge Academy. Layla's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. Connor? Is everything all right? Probably just homesick, Von said, but his pulse quickened. Their 14-year-old son rarely called during the week. I'll take it in private. He crossed the ballroom, nodding at various dignitaries as he passed. The hotel's oak-paneled reception area offered relative quiet, the sounds of the gala muted behind him. The attendant handed him a house phone. Connor? Everything okay, buddy? Yeah, Dad. His son's voice carried the awkward pitch of adolescence. Just wanted to make sure you're coming for Parents' Weekend. Coach Matthews wants to talk about me starting on varsity lacrosse next season. Von detected an undercurrent in his son's voice. I wouldn't miss it. Is there something else? A pause. Can we talk when you're here? Alone. Another pause. Don't tell Mom. Before Von could press further, Connor made an excuse about study hall and hung up. Von handed the phone back to the attendant, his mind cataloging the unusual request. Connor and Layla had always been close. The boy asking to speak with him alone was unprecedented. Everything okay with our prodigy? Layla appeared at his elbow, her timing suspiciously perfect. Fine. Just confirming Parents' Weekend. Von slipped his phone into his pocket. He's hoping to make varsity lacrosse. With those Miller jeans? Of course he will. She linked her arm through his. The secretary's wife is asking about your foundation for wounded veterans. Apparently, her brother served in Afghanistan. Vaughn allowed her to guide him back into the glittering crowd, his mind already processing Connor's request. 14 years as a father had taught him to recognize uncharacteristic behavior in his son. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of strategic conversations and political maneuvering. By midnight, when they finally slipped into the back of their town car, Vaughn had secured 2 potential board members and a promise from Senator Holbrook to support their military contract extension. "You're quieter than usual," Layla observed as they pulled away from the hotel. "Headache worse. Just tired." Vaughn gazed at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. "Dr. Pierce's medication isn't helping much. You're pushing too hard." She rubbed his arm affectionately. "The company is secure, Connor is thriving at Westridge, and we have more money than we could spend in 3 lifetimes. Maybe it's time to ease back." The town car glided through the streets of Georgetown toward their brownstone. Vaughn watched the familiar landmarks pass, contemplating her suggestion. Easing back meant transferring more control to others, something his military experience had taught him to avoid. Delegation was necessary, surrender was not. At home, Layla headed upstairs while Vaughn poured himself a nightcap in the kitchen. The tremor in his hand had worsened, causing a splash of bourbon to spill onto the counter. He wiped it clean, then moved to the window overlooking their private garden. The symptoms had started subtly: occasional tremors, unexplained nausea, persistent fatigue. Dr. Warren Pierce, their physician for 8 years, had run comprehensive tests. Blood work, MRIs, neurological evaluations, all inconclusive. Pierce attributed the symptoms to stress and overwork, prescribing rest and anti-anxiety medication that seemed to make things worse. Vaughn sipped his bourbon, contemplating the garden lights reflecting off the koi pond he'd installed for Connor's 10th birthday. Something about Pierce's explanations felt incomplete, his concern too rehearsed. 15 years in special operations had honed Vaughn's instincts for detecting insincerity. When he heard Layla's shower running upstairs, he moved to the kitchen cabinet and extracted a small metal container from behind the coffee filters. The specialized container, designed to preserve chemical samples, had been part of his mission gear during counterterrorism operations. He carefully transferred a sample of his morning coffee into it, sealing it. With Layla occupied, Vaughn descended to his basement office. Behind a false wall panel concealed by an innocuous bookshelf, he accessed a private server unconnected to his home network. Here, he documented his mysterious symptoms, their onset coinciding suspiciously with Dr. Pierce becoming their family physician 8 years ago. He reviewed the blueprints for the safe room being installed, a precaution following recent threats against defense contractors. Something about the camera placement caught his attention. On impulse, he added an additional concealed camera facing the kitchen coffee maker. Upstairs, the shower stopped. Vaughn closed the hidden panel and returned to the main level, his movements deliberately casual as Layla descended in her silk robe. Coming to bed, she ran a hand through her damp hair, her wedding ring catching the light. "Soon. Just need to answer a few emails." She brushed his cheek with a kiss. "Don't be long. You need rest." Vaughn watched her ascend the stairs again, cataloging the subtle sway of her walk, the practiced tilt of her head, mannerisms he'd once found captivating but now registered as performance. 12 years of marriage had taught him her patterns, just as his military training had taught him to identify behavioral inconsistencies. He waited 30 minutes, ensuring she was asleep, before making a secure call from his study. "It's after midnight, boss," Sarah Mason answered without preamble. His executive assistant had once been military intelligence before joining Sentinel Defense. "Either we've been hacked or you're having one of your paranoid episodes. I need you to run a background check." Quietly. A pause. "Target. Dr. Warren Pierce." "Your doctor? The one who's been treating your mystery illness." Sarah's voice sharpened. "You found something?" "Maybe nothing, but I want a deep dive on his credentials. Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic residency, previous patients. Like Belgrade was just a training exercise." Sarah responded with professional skepticism. "You taught me never to accept convenient explanations. Check for any connections to someone named Layla Morgan before she became Layla Miller." "You suspect your doctor and your wife?" Sarah stopped herself. "Never mind. I'll have a preliminary report in 3 days. Use the secure protocol. No digital footprints." "Always do, boss." She paused. "Those tests from Dr. Pierce showing anything?" "Just stress and overwork, supposedly," Vaughn said, not revealing his growing suspicions. "Take care of yourself, Vaughn," Sarah said, the rare use of his first name underlining her concern. "Whatever's happening, you can't fight it if you're exhausted." After ending the call, Vaughn returned to the guest bathroom. removing his anti-anxiety medication from its bottle. Instead of swallowing it, he sealed it in another collection vial. Tomorrow, he would leave it with his coffee sample at the independent laboratory run by his former military colleague. In the master bedroom, Layla slept peacefully, her breathing deep and regular. Vaughn stood in the doorway, watching her for several moments. The moonlight illuminated her face, peaceful in repose. Was he becoming paranoid? The line between vigilance and paranoia often blurred for men who'd survived what he had. Vaughn moved to his side of the bed, careful not to disturb her. As he settled beside his wife of 12 years, he recalled his Delta Force commander's final words once more. Trust no one completely. Always have a backup plan. He'd built an empire from nothing, rising from an orphan child in foster care to the CEO of a defense contracting powerhouse. He'd survived 3 war zones and built a family from scratch. Whatever was happening, whether external threat or his own deteriorating health, he would face it with the same calculation that had kept him alive in the world's most dangerous places. As sleep finally claimed him, Vaughn's mind continued processing scenarios and contingencies, the habitual vigilance of a man who had learned early that survival depended on preparation. And if someone was targeting him or his family, they would soon discover why his military record remained sealed even 15 years after his honorable discharge. Chapter 2. Bitter Suspicions. 3 days later, Vaughn sat motionless in his private surveillance room, staring at footage from the kitchen camera he'd installed. The pre-dawn light cast bluish shadows across his face as the video played for the 3rd time. Each viewing crystallized his suspicions into something colder and more certain. The high-definition footage showed Layla in her silk robe, carefully measuring a white powder into his coffee maker's water reservoir. Her movements were practiced, efficient, not the actions of someone doing this for the first time. Most damning was her furtive glance toward the doorway, the guilty check of someone ensuring they weren't observed. His first thought wasn't poison, but rather medication. Perhaps Dr. Pierce had enlisted her help administering some treatment? But her secretive manner suggested otherwise. This wasn't medical care. This was covert administration of an unknown substance. The secured terminal beeped, indicating an encrypted message from Sarah. He entered a 16-character passcode, revealing her preliminary report on Dr. Warren Pierce. According to official records, Sarah had written, Dr. Warren Pierce completed medical school at Johns Hopkins with honors. Board certified in internal medicine with specialty training in toxicology. Prestigious residency at Mayo Clinic. Vaughn skimmed through these surface credentials, finding nothing immediately suspicious. Then he reached Sarah's deeper investigation. Dig beyond the official paperwork and inconsistencies emerge. His claimed 3-year residency at Mayo shows unexplained gaps. Former colleague Dr. Hendrick mentioned research misconduct allegations before abruptly ending our conversation. 3 different hospital affiliations list him with slightly different credentials. Vaughn leaned forward as he read the final paragraph. Financial anomalies. Pierce maintains a Swiss bank account receiving quarterly payments of exactly $250,000 from a shell corporation called Pinnacle Health Consultants. This entity connects to 3 different insurance providers through subsidiaries. Additional investigation required to determine significance. Vaughn closed the report and leaned back in his chair, processing this information against his own observations. The mysterious symptoms had begun approximately 8 months after Pierce became their family physician. The tremors, fatigue, and cognitive issues had progressed gradually, subtle enough that he'd initially attributed them to age and stress. His phone vibrated with a calendar alert. Appointment with Dr. Pierce in 2 hours. Vaughn showered and dressed with careful attention to his appearance, deliberately accentuating his symptoms by skipping his morning coffee. The same coffee Layla had doctored earlier. He needed Pierce to believe his condition was progressing as expected. You're up early, Layla remarked when he entered the kitchen. She wore yoga pants and a fitted top, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. I made your coffee. Thanks. Vaughn accepted the mug, pretending to sip while actually letting the liquid touch only his closed lips. I have an appointment with Warren this morning. More tests. Something flickered across her face, concern mingled with calculation, before settling into a sympathetic smile. I can reschedule my charity board meeting if you want company. No need. Just routine blood work. He set the untouched coffee aside. I might stop by the office afterward if I'm feeling up to it. Don't push yourself. She touched his arm, her fingers lingering on his sleeve. Your health comes first. Vaughn nodded, noting how her concern never quite reached her eyes. Had it always been this way, or was he only noticing now through the lens of suspicion? Dr. Pierce's office occupied the ground floor of a converted Georgetown townhouse. The waiting room featured tasteful artwork, mahogany furniture, and the discreet luxury that catered to Washington's political and financial elite. Mr. Miller. Pierce greeted him with a professionally warm handshake. The doctor was 50-something with silver-streaked dark hair and the lean physique of a distance runner. You're looking a bit peaked today. Symptoms worse. The tremors are more frequent. Vaughn deliberately exaggerated the shake in his right hand. And I nearly blacked out in the shower this morning. Pierce's brow furrowed with practiced concern as he guided Vaughn to an examination room. Let's run some additional tests. Your last blood work showed some anomalies I'd like to investigate further. The nurse drew several vials of blood, while Pierce reviewed Vaughn's previous results on a tablet. Your arsenic levels are elevated from last time. Environmental exposure, perhaps. Arsenic. Vaughn maintained a neutral expression despite the confirmation of his suspicions. Is that serious? Not at these levels. Pierce's tone was reassuring, his expression professionally concerned. But we should identify the source. Heavy metals like arsenic accumulate over time. Any new dietary changes? Seafood consumption? Nothing comes to mind. Vaughn allowed a hint of anxiety to enter his voice. Could it be related to the tremors? Possibly. Chronic arsenic exposure can cause neurological symptoms similar to what you're experiencing. Pierce made notes on his tablet. I'm prescribing chelation therapy to help your body eliminate the arsenic. And I should check Connor during my lecture at Westridge next week. If there's an environmental exposure in your home, he could be affected too. Vaughn's military instincts, dormant for years, flared to life at the mention of his son. That won't be necessary. I'm visiting him this weekend. All the same, a simple blood test would be prudent. Pierce's suggestion carried an insistence that triggered another warning bell in Vaughn's mind. Teens his age often hide symptoms they don't understand. I appreciate your thoroughness, Vaughn replied carefully. I'll discuss it with Connor. After leaving Pierce's office with prescriptions he had no intention of filling, Vaughn drove to a specialized laboratory in an industrial area of Arlington. The nondescript building housed Advanced Toxicology Associates, a private facility run by Dr. Alan Mercer, a former Army toxicologist who had worked with Vaughn's Delta unit analyzing chemical weapons traces. Didn't expect to see you again after Damascus, Mercer said, ushering Vaughn into his office. The space was utilitarian, filled with advanced equipment rather than the cosmetic luxuries of Pierce's practice. I need your help. Off the books. Vaughn placed 2 samples on Mercer's desk, his blood drawn an hour before Pierce's appointment and the coffee sample from that morning. Mercer's expression grew serious as Vaughn outlined his suspicions. You think your wife is poisoning you? I need to know what's in both samples. And I need absolute confidentiality. Mercer nodded slowly. This will take 24 hours for comprehensive analysis. But off the record, if you're suspecting arsenic poisoning, you should know it's cumulative. Even if you stop exposure now, your system may already be compromised. How badly? Depends on dosage and duration. Mercer picked up the samples. Do you have symptoms beyond the tremors and fatigue? Occasional memory lapses. Nausea. Headaches. Consistent with chronic arsenicosis. Mercer's expression grew grim. If this has been ongoing for months, you could be looking at permanent nerve damage, cognitive impairment, or worse. I'll prioritize this analysis. Back in his car, Vaughn made another call on a secure line. I was wondering when you'd resurface, Marcus Dawson answered, his deep voice carrying the faint traces of his Louisiana upbringing. Last I heard, you were playing corporate executive and raising a kid in suburbia. I need your expertise on something discreet. Vaughn kept his voice neutral despite the storm of emotions beneath. Like Belgrade discreet, or Damascus discreet? Marcus asked, their code for the classified operations that had sealed their military files. Domestic, but potentially Belgrade level. Vaughn hesitated. And I need you to run a background check on my wife. A long pause followed. That's not a request you make lightly. You sure about this? I need to know everything about Layla Morgan before she became Layla Miller. And I need to know if she has any connection to my physician, Dr. Warren Pierce. Timeline. Yesterday, Vaughn watched a young family pass his parked car, the normalcy of their interaction suddenly alien to him. And Marcus, this stays between us. Always does, brother. The line went silent, leaving Vaughn alone with his thoughts. That afternoon, instead of returning home or visiting his office, Vaughn checked into a hotel room overlooking his Georgetown brownstone. Using specialized equipment from a secured storage unit he maintained separate from his regular assets, he established surveillance on his own home. Through high-powered optics, he watched Dr. Pierce arrive at 3 o'clock, exactly when Layla had claimed to be attending her charity board meeting. Pierce didn't knock. He used a key, entered, and embraced Layla intimately before they disappeared inside together. They remained in the house for 3 hours. While maintaining surveillance, Vaughn received a call from Mercer. I've analyzed both samples, the toxicologist said without preamble. Your coffee contains arsenic trioxide, 5 times the lethal dose if consumed regularly. Your blood shows chronic exposure consistent with incremental poisoning over approximately 6 to 8 months. Vaughn's hand tightened on the phone. Translation? Someone's been poisoning you slowly, building up levels without triggering immediate symptoms. The dose in your coffee would eventually accumulate to lethal levels while mimicking a degenerative condition. Another 3 months of this regimen, you'd be dead. And recovery? Stop exposure immediately. I can provide chelation compounds more effective than what's commercially available. Mercer paused. Vaughn, this wasn't accidental. The arsenic trioxide in your coffee is pharmaceutical grade, not something found in household products. I understand. Vaughn ended the call, refocusing his surveillance equipment on his home. Through the bedroom window, he observed Layla and Pierce emerging from the master bath, their disheveled appearance confirming the nature of their relationship. But what happened next chilled him further. They proceeded to his home office, where Pierce accessed Vaughn's computer using a password Vaughn had never shared with his wife. Using a remote security protocol he'd installed years earlier, Vaughn activated additional hidden cameras in his office and captured them photographing his financial documents and downloading files from his computer. His phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. Call me. Urgent. Vaughn dialed the secure number. What did you find? Pierce changed his name 20 years ago. Marcus's voice was taut with tension. Original name was Warren Pittman. And Layla's maiden name? Also Pittman. They're not just lovers, they're siblings. Vaughn nearly dropped the phone. Siblings. Half-siblings, same father. And there's more. Layla's cousin Trent Baxter has 3 fraud convictions and recently visited Westridge Academy, signing in as family. The implications hit Vaughn like physical blows. His wife, if she was even legally his wife, was not only poisoning him but was doing so in collusion with her brother posing as his doctor. And now they had contacted his son. I need everything you can find on Trent Baxter, Vaughn said, his voice unnaturally calm. And I need to know if Layla Morgan actually exists. Already checking. Initial search suggests the real Layla Morgan disappeared while backpacking in Europe 15 years ago. Never found. As night fell, Vaughn observed Pierce leaving with what appeared to be a flash drive, and Layla making a series of calls from a phone he'd never seen before. Using specialized audio surveillance equipment, he captured fragments of her conversation. Once he's gone, forged the paternity test. Connor's trust fund. The cold that had made Vaughn exceptional in Delta Force settled over him like armor. His wife and her brother had targeted him for his money. They were poisoning him slowly to avoid suspicion. And most unforgivably, they planned to cut Connor out of his inheritance using forged paternity tests. Vaughn watched the woman he'd loved for 12 years, the mother of his child, plotting his death with clinical detachment. The betrayal crystallized into something beyond rage, beyond hurt. A clarity of purpose he hadn't felt since his final mission in Damascus. They had chosen the wrong man to target. And they had made a fatal error in threatening his son. Chapter 3. Poison Revelations. The grounds of Westridge Academy sprawled across 80 manicured acres in Virginia's Hunt Country. Late-blooming roses lined the brick pathways between ivy-covered buildings, and students in navy blazers crossed the quad carrying lacrosse sticks and leather satchels. The picture of privileged education that Vaughn's foster care childhood could never have imagined. Connor waited on the steps of Madison Hall, his lanky frame betraying the recent growth spurt that had added 3 inches to his height since summer. At 14, he already stood eye level with Vaughn, though his shoulders had yet to fill out his school blazer. Dad. Connor's greeting carried genuine warmth as he embraced Vaughn, then stepped back with the self-consciousness of adolescence. You made it. Wouldn't miss it. Vaughn studied his son's face, looking for signs of tampering. He had spent the previous night injecting himself with specialized chelation compounds from his military medical kit to combat the arsenic Pierce had administered. But had they reached Connor too? Connor's usual enthusiasm seemed subdued, his posture tense as they walked the campus grounds. Vaughn waited, letting the silence build naturally until Connor was ready to speak. Coach Matthews says I might start on varsity in spring. Connor began, clearly deflecting from whatever was truly on his mind. That's impressive for a freshman. Vaughn navigated them away from other families touring the campus. You mentioned wanting to speak with me alone? Connor glanced around before continuing. Something weird happened last week. Mom's cousin Trent visited after Dr. Pierce gave his health lecture. I wasn't aware your mother had a cousin named Trent, Vaughn said carefully. Neither was I until then. Connor kicked at a pine cone. He cornered me after the lecture and said you aren't my biological father. Said Mom told him years ago. Connor's voice cracked. He said once you're gone, which would be sooner than I think, I'd go to foster care because you're not my real dad. and they'd get everything. Vaughn maintained his composure despite the rage building inside him. Did you tell your mother about this conversation? I called her right after. She said Trent was drunk and making things up. Connor's gaze fixed on the distant sports fields. But Dad, he knew things about our family nobody else would know. Like the stuffed dinosaur I had as a kid, and Mom's allergic reaction in Barbados. Vaughn nodded slowly, processing this information against what Marcus had discovered. As they passed Connor's dormitory, Vaughn spotted a subtle listening device disguised as a smoke detector. The distinctive configuration matching specialized surveillance equipment that wasn't commercially available. Silently, he guided Connor away from the building toward the empty lacrosse field, where ambient noise would mask their conversation. Connor, I need to ask you something important. Has Dr. Pierce been giving you any medications during his visits here? Any health screenings? Connor nodded. He said it was part of a school-wide preventative health program. Took blood samples from all students whose parents approved. Mom signed the form. He hesitated before continuing. And he gave me these vitamins to take daily. He produced a small bottle from his pocket. Vaughn examined the pills, which appeared identical to his own medication. I want you to stop taking these immediately. Tell no one we had this conversation. As they continued walking the perimeter of the playing fields, Vaughn noticed an unfamiliar man photographing them from beyond the campus boundary. When Vaughn changed direction toward him, the man quickly retreated to a black SUV and departed. Dad, what's happening? Connor asked, fear evident in his voice. I'm going to fix everything, Vaughn promised, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. But for now, I need you to trust me completely and tell no one what we've discussed. Before leaving, Vaughn arranged a meeting with Westridge's head of security, Frank Morales, a retired Marine he'd specifically selected when choosing Connor's school. They met in Morales' office overlooking the campus entrance. The security chief's desk was meticulously organized, reflecting his military background. Thanks for seeing me on short notice, Frank, Vaughn began. We have a situation. You look like hell, Vaughn, Morales observed bluntly. What's going on? I need Connor protected. No visitors except me, personally. Not even his mother or Dr. Pierce. Especially not them. Morales leaned forward, 20 years of military service evident in his direct gaze. This sounds serious. Life or death? Vaughn confirmed, providing Frank with photographs of Trent and the man who had been watching them earlier. These individuals are not to have any contact with my son under any circumstances. If they attempt to remove Connor from campus, detain them and contact me immediately. You're talking about restricting your wife's access to her own child? Morales noted carefully. That requires legal documentation, which I'll provide by Monday. Vaughn met his gaze steadily. Until then, I'm asking you as a fellow veteran to trust my judgment. Connor is in danger. Morales studied the photographs, then nodded decisively. We'll implement a security protocol immediately. Connor will be under discreet surveillance at all times. One more thing. Vaughn placed a small device on Morales' desk. This detector will identify any additional surveillance equipment in Connor's quarters or classrooms. I have reason to believe he's being monitored. By whom? That's what I'm determining. Vaughn stood to leave. Whatever happens, Connor's safety is the priority. Understood. Morales escorted him to the door. Vaughn, if you're in trouble, I'm handling it. Vaughn's tone ended further discussion. That evening, driving back to Washington, Vaughn received Marcus's complete report via secure messenger. The information confirmed his worst fears while revealing new dimensions to the conspiracy. 3 wealthy men previously treated by Dr. Pierce had died of natural causes after sudden health declines. Each had recently married women matching descriptions similar to Layla under different names. Each death resulted in substantial insurance payouts. The pattern is consistent, Marcus explained in his attached notes. They identify wealthy targets, preferably with troubled pasts or limited family connections. The sister seduces and marries them. The brother becomes their physician. They diagnose mysterious ailments while slowly poisoning them. And Connor? Vaughn had texted back. Why threaten him? In each previous case, they eliminated potential inheritance obstacles. One victim's teenage daughter mysteriously overdosed after challenging the wife's claim to the estate. Instead of returning home, Vaughn drove to his secure apartment, a property purchased through a shell company that didn't appear in any of his financial records. From there, he accessed his home surveillance system remotely. The kitchen footage showed Layla and Pierce measuring powder from a vial labeled as 203, arsenic trioxide. Their laughter echoed through his speakers as Pierce demonstrated how to increase the dosage without raising suspicion. Once he's gone, Connor's paternity test will show he's not the biological father, Pierce said with clinical detachment. With the documents we've planted and your testimony about his increasing paranoia, The inheritance will transfer cleanly. And Trent has the judge handle? Layla asked, her southern accent completely absent now. Everything's in place. It just needs time to work. Judge Novak owes me after I falsified his wife's cancer diagnosis to help him win that custody battle against his ex. As the video continued, Vaughn discovered the true depths of their plan. Layla was not Layla at all, but Elaine Pittman, convicted of insurance fraud 10 years ago before assuming a new identity. The real Layla Morgan had disappeared while backpacking in Europe, her identity stolen for this elaborate con. Their conversation revealed the full scope of their operation, not merely targeting Vaughn for his wealth, but specifically selecting him because of his foster care background, which meant fewer family connections to question his decline. They'd meticulously built their cover for years, with Pierce establishing himself as a respected physician among Washington's elite, while Elaine crafted the perfect persona to attract Vaughn's attention. Most disturbingly, they spoke of Connor as merely an obstacle to eliminate. The vitamins Pierce had provided were designed to make him appear unstable, supporting their narrative that Vaughn's mental decline was hereditary. Vaughn sat motionless in his surveillance room, absorbing every detail of their plan. The man who had survived 3 war zones now faced an enemy within his own home. His fingers traced the keypad to the safe room he'd built, not for external threats, but now serving an entirely different purpose. Opening his old military footlocker, Vaughn removed a specialized kit and injected himself with a clear fluid, specialized antidote compounds from his classified operations. Then he activated an encrypted communication line to Marcus. How quickly can you assemble the old team? Vaughn asked without preamble. Depends on what you're planning. Marcus's voice carried caution. Ramirez and Johnson are contractors in Dubai. Torres works private security in Texas. Mitchell's doing something classified I can't discuss. I need surveillance, counter-surveillance, and recovery capabilities. Domestic operation, high risk. A pause. This isn't some corporate espionage situation, is it? You're talking about going after your wife and her brother. They're planning to eliminate my son, Marcus. Vaughn's voice remained unnaturally calm. There's no line I won't cross to protect him. You understand what you're suggesting falls outside any legal framework, right? Your military file is classified for a reason, Vaughn. If you go down this road. They threaten my son, Vaughn interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. I'm not asking you to participate in anything illegal. I need intelligence, security, and contingency planning. Give me 48 hours. Marcus's tone shifted to operational mode. And Vaughn, whatever happened to that corporate executive who coached Little League and attended charity galas? He discovered his wife and her brother have been slowly poisoning him for 8 months while planning to eliminate his son. Vaughn's voice that had once made him Delta Force's most effective operator. And now he's going to show them why his military record remains sealed. The line went silent as Marcus processed the transformation in his former commander. Finally, he said, I'll make the calls. But Vaughn, remember what happened in Belgrade when we lost perspective? Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. After ending the call, Vaughn began gathering evidence and arranging secure communication channels. He transferred emergency funds from accounts Layla couldn't access, established fail-safe protocols with Sarah Mason at Sentinel Defense, and prepared contingency plans for Connor's protection. As dawn broke over Washington, Vaughn stood at the window of his secure apartment, watching the city awaken. The man who had built a life from nothing, rising from an orphan child to decorated soldier to successful CEO, now prepared to dismantle the carefully constructed deception surrounding him. Opening his laptop, he began documenting everything he'd discovered, creating an evidence trail that would stand up in court if necessary. But the cold calculation in his eyes suggested that justice might come in forms no court would sanction. They had chosen the wrong man to target, and they would soon discover why those who had crossed Von Miller in his military days had never lived to speak of it. Chapter 4. Calculated Resistance. For 2 weeks, Von Miller played the perfect victim. Each morning, he drank the poisoned coffee Layla prepared, maintaining the same routine they'd established over years of marriage. He allowed his hands to shake during business meetings, canceled appointments citing fatigue, and permitted Dr. Pierce to document his declining health with growing satisfaction. Your arsenic levels continue to rise, Pierce noted during their Tuesday appointment, his concern a masterpiece of professional falsity. We need to be more aggressive with treatment. Whatever you think best, Vaughn replied, his voice deliberately weakened. He hunched his shoulders, adding a slight tremor to his left hand, a symptom he knew Pierce had documented in previous cases. What Pierce couldn't see was that each night, in the privacy of his secure apartment, Vaughn injected the military-grade chelation compounds that gradually flushed the arsenic from his system. He maintained a log of daily blood samples, tracking his actual condition while presenting a convincing facade of deterioration. "You're looking rough, buddy," Marcus observed during their clandestine meeting in an underground parking garage 3 blocks from Sentinel Defense Headquarters. The former Delta operator leaned against a concrete pillar, his posture casual, but his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Sure you don't want to just turn the evidence over to the cops? And risk Connor getting caught in legal limbo while they investigate?" Vaughn shook his head. "Layla has fake documents claiming I'm not his biological father. They've bribed Judge Novak to fast-track custody decisions once I'm gone. I need time to dismantle their entire operation." Marcus handed him a manila envelope. "My contact at the Bureau ran facial recognition on your wife through the federal database. Elaine Pittman has quite a history. 2 counts of insurance fraud in Arizona, identity theft in Nevada, all under various aliases. Charges dropped each time when witnesses mysteriously recanted. And Pierce. Warren Pittman lost his medical license in Ohio 15 years ago after a patient died under suspicious circumstances. Disappeared during the investigation, resurfaced as Warren Pierce 5 years later with impeccable credentials that don't hold up to deep scrutiny." Vaughn took the envelope, sliding it inside his jacket. "The storage facility? Registered to Trent Baxter. Located in Alexandria." Marcus passed him a key card. "Security is minimal. My scan detected electronic locks, but no cameras inside the units themselves. Any sign they're onto us?" Marcus shook his head. "They believe you're dying on schedule. Pierce even booked a vacation to the Caymans for next month, presumably to celebrate your demise." Vaughn nodded, processing this information. "Keep watching Connor. Frank Morales has increased security at Westridge, but Trent has already made one approach. I don't trust him to stop there." "Your military file was classified for a reason, Vaughn," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "If you go down this road." "They threaten my son," Vaughn interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "There's no line I won't cross." Back in his secure workshop, Vaughn prepared specialized equipment, microscopic tracking devices originally designed for covert operations in hostile territories. He'd acquired them through channels from his military days, contacts who asked no questions when a former Delta operator needed equipment that technically didn't exist. That night, Vaughn prepared for a formal dinner at the Kennedy Center, an event honoring veterans charities where Sentinel Defense was a major donor. As he adjusted his bow tie, Layla entered their bedroom wearing a black evening gown, her ruby necklace catching the light. "You should sit this one out," she suggested, her concern appearing genuine to anyone who didn't know better. "You're pushing yourself too hard." "Can't miss it," Vaughn replied, deliberately slurring his words slightly. "Major donor's expecting me. At least take your medication before we go." She handed him a pill with a glass of water, watching as he swallowed it. The pill now rested in a pocket under his tongue, a trick he'd learned during captivity training. Later, it would join the growing collection of evidence in his laboratory. During dinner, Vaughn played his role perfectly, the successful CEO fighting a mysterious illness with dignity. He allowed his hand to shake while lifting his water glass, apologized quietly when he accidentally knocked over the salt shaker, and excused himself twice, ostensibly for bathroom breaks. Each time, he used the opportunity to implement his plan. First, he planted a microscopic tracking device in the clasp of Layla's ruby necklace, her favorite piece of jewelry that she wore to all important functions. During the second absence, he bumped into Pierce at the bar, using the brief physical contact to plant another tracker in the doctor's watchband. "Warren," Vaughn greeted him, deliberately gripping the edge of the bar for support. "Didn't know you'd be here." "Senator Holbrook invited me," Pierce replied smoothly. "He's considering a significant donation to my research foundation." "You're looking a bit unstable, Vaughn. Perhaps you should head home early." "I'm fine," Vaughn insisted with the stubborn pride of a man refusing to acknowledge his decline. "Just need to catch my breath." Pierce patted his shoulder patronizingly. "Don't overdo it. Your condition requires careful management." By the time they returned home, Vaughn's tracking system was fully operational. Over the next 3 days, he monitored their movements on a secure tablet, identifying patterns and meeting locations. Most significantly, both Layla and Pierce regularly visited a storage facility in Alexandria registered to Trent Baxter. During one of Pierce's hospital shifts, Vaughn drove to the facility, using an access code obtained from his surveillance. The unit was at the end of a row, partially obscured by a maintenance shed, perfect for privacy. Inside, he discovered a trove of damning evidence. Falsified medical certificates arranged in an orderly filing system, photographs of previous victims with detailed notes on their financial assets, various identity documents under different names, and vials of arsenic trioxide alongside medical equipment for creating undetectable toxins. Most disturbing was a thick file labeled Connor Miller, Custody Transfer Protocol, containing falsified paternity tests, psychological evaluations painting Vaughn as unstable, and custody transfer documents awaiting Judge Novak's signature. The file detailed plans to commit Connor to a psychiatric facility immediately following Vaughn's death, citing hereditary mental instability as justification. Vaughn photographed everything, then planted his own surveillance devices throughout the unit. Before leaving, he took a sample of the arsenic, which he'd need for his own plan. That afternoon, Vaughn met with Gloria Winslow, his attorney, in a private dining room at the Metropolitan Club. Gloria had represented him since he founded Sentinel Defense, her reputation for ruthless effectiveness balanced by her absolute discretion. "You look terrible," she noted bluntly as she took a seat across from him. At 62, Gloria maintained the sharp demeanor that had made her legendary in Washington legal circles. Her silver hair was cut in a precise bob, her charcoal suit projecting authority without flash. "That's intentional," Vaughn replied, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Everything I've discovered is on this. I need 3 things. First, ironclad documentation proving Connor is my biological son. Second, a revised will that leaves everything in trust for Connor with you as executor if anything happens to me. Third, I need information on a Judge Raymond Novak." Gloria's eyebrows rose. "Novak? He's been investigated twice for suspicious rulings in custody cases. Nothing stuck." "It will this time," Vaughn promised. Gloria inserted the drive into her secure tablet, her expression hardening as she reviewed the contents. "You understand this contains evidence of multiple felonies. As your attorney, I should advise you to take this directly to federal authorities. And risk Connor getting caught in the crossfire? Layla, or whatever her real name is, has been establishing groundwork to challenge paternity. If I'm suddenly dead, and she has control of my assets, she could tie up Connor's custody for years. You realize what you're asking involves considerable risk," Gloria cautioned. "They're poisoning me, Gloria, planning to steal my son and my company. Conventional responses aren't an option." Gloria studied him for a long moment. "I have a contact at the DNA testing lab. We can establish chain of custody for a paternity test that will stand up to any scrutiny. As for Novak, my investigator has been building a file on him for years. His rulings consistently favor certain attorneys, including Melissa Cohen, who happens to be Trent Baxter's ex-wife. That's the connection we need," Vaughn said. "And one more thing. I need to arrange my own death." Gloria didn't flinch at the request. Instead, she closed her tablet and leaned forward. "Explain. They expect me to die within weeks. Rather than disappoint them, I'll give them exactly what they want, on my terms. Once they believe I'm dead, they'll accelerate their plans, making mistakes we can document. And Connor, protected at Westridge with enhanced security. Frank Morales has implemented protocols to prevent unauthorized removal. I need you to file emergency motions restricting custody transfers pending investigation if anything happens to me." Gloria nodded, making notes on her legal pad. "I'll need a DNA sample from Connor to establish paternity conclusively." "Already handled. Frank obtained a sample yesterday, ostensibly for the school's medical records." Later that evening, Vaughn manipulated his company's security protocols to grant himself after-hours access to the laboratory where government weapons testing occurred. Using specialized equipment, he confirmed his current arsenic levels and manufactured additional antidote compounds. He also secured more microscopic tracking devices and listening equipment originally designed for military operations. In his company's secure vault, Vaughn accessed classified files from his military days, specifically a protocol for establishing cover identities that included methods for faking death in hostile territory. The technique had saved 3 operatives during the Belgrade operation, allowing them to escape after being officially declared dead. That night, he planted additional bugs throughout his house, discovering Layla's burner phone hidden in her jewelry box. The text messages revealed the entire conspiracy's timeline: Pierce and Layla's 2-year affair, plans for Vaughn's elimination, details about previous victims, and Trent's role in falsifying legal documents. A final message sent ice through Vaughn's veins: increasing dosage tomorrow. Should be over within 2 weeks. While Layla slept, Vaughn secured samples of her handwriting and voice recordings, which he delivered to Sarah Mason with encrypted instructions for creating forgeries if needed. "This goes beyond corporate espionage," Sarah noted as she reviewed his instructions in her Spartan office at Sentinel headquarters. Her military intelligence background made her one of the few people Vaughn trusted completely. "It's exactly what they're doing," Vaughn corrected her. "Pierce didn't just target me for my personal wealth. The storage unit contained files on Sentinel's classified government contracts, particularly the autonomous drone encryption system. Sarah's expression hardened. That's classified technology. If it's compromised, national security implications, Vaughn finished, making this more than personal. What do you need from me? Run the company while I'm dead. Quietly monitor for any unusual data access or transfer attempts. And be ready to provide these documents. He handed her a sealed envelope. When I give the signal. Sarah took the envelope without opening it. And if something goes wrong, the package also contains evidence of everything I've discovered. If I don't contact you within 72 hours of my death, deliver it directly to FBI Special Agent Thomas Keller. As dawn broke, Vaughn returned to his house, slipping into bed beside the woman who had shared his life for 12 years while plotting his death. He studied her sleeping face. The features he had once found beautiful now revealed calculation in their perfect symmetry. Tomorrow would begin the final phase of his plan. If successful, he would reclaim his life and protect his son. If not, he had arranged for justice to follow his actual death, a contingency plan worthy of his Delta Force training. As Layla stirred beside him, Vaughn closed his eyes, pretending sleep. The game continued, but the rules had changed. The hunter was now the hunted, though she didn't know it yet. Chapter 5, Tactical Advantage. Mr. Miller? Mr. Miller, can you hear me? The voice seemed distant, filtering through layers of consciousness as Vaughn opened his eyes to the planned chaos of Sentinel Defense's executive boardroom. He had collapsed during the quarterly budget meeting, exactly as scheduled. Sarah Mason knelt beside him, her concern appearing genuine to the stunned board members watching the company's founder convulse on the Italian marble floor. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted, while Sarah loosened his tie with practiced efficiency. "Already done," she responded, her fingers checking his pulse with theatrical urgency. "His doctor needs to be notified immediately. Dr. Warren Pierce." Within minutes, paramedics rushed into the boardroom, loading Vaughn onto a gurney as Sarah provided them with his medical history, a carefully crafted document emphasizing his existing condition and specifying Pierce as his physician. "I'll ride with him," Sarah insisted, climbing into the ambulance. Once the doors closed, she pulled the privacy curtain and quickly administered a compound that mimicked severe symptoms while countering the actual arsenic in his system. Pulse elevated, blood pressure dropping. A paramedic called out as they approached Georgetown University Hospital. Possible toxicity reaction. At the emergency entrance, Dr. Pierce waited with practiced concern, white coat fluttering as he directed the gurney to a private room. "I'm his personal physician. I'll take over from here." Rushed to the hospital under Pierce's care, Vaughn appeared to be fighting for his life, while secretly monitoring everything through specialized contact lenses that recorded video. Sarah Mason, posing as his executive assistant, insisted on staying nearby for company business matters, allowing her to observe Pierce's activities and medical orders. "His condition has deteriorated more rapidly than expected," Pierce murmured to an attending nurse, administering what he claimed was a specialized treatment through Vaughn's 4. Sarah, watching from the corner, discreetly photographed the medication vial with a pen camera disguised as a company logo. With Layla sobbing convincingly in the hallway, Pierce administered what he claimed was another specialized treatment, but was actually a lethal dose meant to end matters quickly. "Cardiac arrest imminent," the nurse announced as alarms blared. In the controlled chaos, Marcus, disguised as a hospital orderly, switched Vaughn's 4 to a harmless saline solution while applying a compound that temporarily mimicked death-like vital signs. Code Blue. Code Blue. Medical staff rushed into the room as Pierce performed perfunctory resuscitation attempts, his actions lacking the urgency of someone genuinely trying to save a life. After 12 minutes of supposed life-saving efforts, Pierce stepped back, glancing at his watch. Time of death, for 17 p.m. Layla's wails echoed through the corridor, her performance convincing to everyone except the 3 people who knew the truth. The hospital issued a death certificate, and Vaughn's body was transferred to a private mortuary, actually operated by former military contacts who helped him disappear. "They'll conduct an autopsy," Marcus warned at their secure location, an abandoned NSA listening post in rural Virginia that had been decommissioned after the Cold War. "Standard procedure for unexpected deaths. The body they're examining isn't mine," Vaughn explained, reviewing the security footage from cameras Sarah had planted in the hospital room. Gloria arranged for an unclaimed John Doe with similar physical characteristics. By the time anyone realizes the difference, this will be over. The monitoring screens showed Pierce completing paperwork while Layla made phone calls in the hospital corridor. Through directional microphones, they captured her conversation with Trent. "It's done. Contact Novak about expediting the custody hearing." "That's crossing into serious legal territory," Sarah noted, concerned as she reviewed the body-switching operation details. falsifying death certificates, substituting corpses. They crossed that line when they targeted my son, Vaughn responded coldly. He pointed to another monitor showing Connor at Westridge, safely attending classes under Frank Morales' watchful eye. Besides, the John Doe was unclaimed, destined for a pauper's grave. Now he'll have a first-class funeral instead. Meanwhile, at the county morgue, the mortuary substitution nearly unraveled when a young medical examiner, Dr. Rebecca Chun, noticed discrepancies in dental records. These molars don't match the previous dental x-rays, she muttered, comparing the charts to the body before her. The facial features matched Von Miller's photographs, but certain dental work was inconsistent with his records. Before she could report her findings, Trent Baxter arrived with a substantial bribe, ensuring the death certificate remained unquestioned and fast-tracking cremation approval to destroy evidence. Mr. Miller's family has requested expedited processing due to religious considerations, Trent explained, sliding an envelope across her desk. Judge Novak has already approved the accelerated timeline. Dr. Chun hesitated, her professional ethics warring with the $10,000 in the envelope. There are irregularities in the dental records that should be addressed. Simple clerical errors, I'm sure. Trent interrupted smoothly. The family is already devastated. Technical delays would only compound their suffering. Unknown to them, every conversation was recorded by devices Sarah had planted in the morgue, creating a comprehensive evidence trail of conspiracy and corruption. At Westridge Academy, Frank Morales received a call from Layla announcing Vaughn's death and requesting Connor's immediate release into her custody. When he hesitated, citing Vaughn's strict instructions, Judge Novak personally called to threaten legal consequences if Connor wasn't released immediately. Mrs. Miller has sole custody following her husband's passing, Novak insisted, his judicial authority clear in his tone. The boy should be with his mother during this difficult time. Frank stalled by requesting official documentation, then contacted Gloria Winslow as Vaughn had instructed if anything happened to him. Gloria immediately filed emergency motions challenging Novak's jurisdiction, creating a 48-hour delay. The motion cites questions regarding biological parentage that must be resolved before custody changes, Gloria explained to Frank during their secure call. It won't hold forever, but it buys us time. Connor knows something's wrong, Frank reported. He's asking questions about his father's condition. Maintain protocols, Gloria instructed. No unsupervised contact with anyone, including his mother, until we receive further instructions. Publicly declared dead, Vaughn watched through surveillance as Layla and Pierce celebrated in his Georgetown study. From his monitoring station, he observed them toasting with champagne, discussing how they would spend his fortune after the grieving period. Trent arrived with Judge Novak, who promised to expedite the custody hearing challenging Connor's paternity once the will entered probate. The DNA test results are ready whenever needed, Trent confirmed, opening a folder containing falsified laboratory reports. Shows zero paternal match to Miller, as requested. What about the Westridge security guard? Novak asked, sipping the 20-year-old scotch Vaughn had received as a gift from the Secretary of Defense. He's creating problems. I've got someone handling him tonight, Trent assured them. By morning, Connor will be released to Layla's custody without interference. Vaughn immediately dispatched Marcus to protect Frank Morales, while he contacted Connor through an encrypted messaging app they'd established years earlier as a fun security game. Trust no one right now, Vaughn wrote. Your mother will claim I'm dead. I'm not. Stay at school no matter what. Security team is watching you 24/7. Dad, Connor responded immediately. They called me to the headmaster's office. Said there was an accident. Whatever happens, stay in public spaces. Don't eat or drink anything they give you. Is Mom involved? Connor's question appeared on the screen, the typing indicator showing his hesitation. Yes. Dr. Pierce too. I'll explain everything soon. Trust only Frank Morales. Meanwhile, Detective Sadie Reeves from Financial Crimes approached Gloria Winslow with suspicious findings. They met in Gloria's office, blinds drawn against the evening skyline. 3 wealthy men died after marrying women matching Mrs. Miller's description under different names, Reeves explained, spreading photographs across Gloria's desk. Each time, Dr. Pierce was the attending physician. Each death involved arsenic poisoning disguised as natural causes. Gloria feigned surprise while secretly recording the conversation for Vaughn. Perhaps you should delay the cremation Mrs. Miller has scheduled for tomorrow. Already tried. Judge Novak signed an emergency order citing religious necessity. The body's being cremated in 6 hours. That's unusually fast, Gloria noted. I wonder what they're hiding. Detective Reeves's eyes narrowed. Precisely what I'm wondering. The timing is suspicious, especially with the substantial life insurance policy that just cleared verification. 20 million, Gloria confirmed. Plus Sentinel Defense stock options currently valued at approximately 300 million. Quite a motive, Reeves observed. And you represent Mr. Miller's estate? I do. And I find the rush to cremation concerning, especially given certain irregularities in Mr. Miller's medical treatment. Reeves leaned forward. What irregularities? Gloria opened a folder containing Vaughn's medical records, the real ones, not Pierce's falsified versions. Blood tests from an independent laboratory showing arsenic levels inconsistent with environmental exposure. And this, she slid forward a photograph. Dr. Pierce with Mrs. Miller at a hotel in Baltimore 3 years ago. Mr. Miller was apparently unaware of their pre-existing relationship. Detective Reeves studied the photograph. I need copies of everything. Of course, Gloria agreed. And detective? Time is critical, not just for justice, but for Connor Miller's safety. Back at the monitoring station, Vaughn watched as Trent dispatched 2 men toward Westridge Academy. Their conversation, captured through directional microphones, confirmed they intended to neutralize Frank Morales and extract Connor regardless of legal obstacles. Our window is closing, Vaughn told Marcus and Sarah. They're accelerating the timeline. The FBI needs more evidence before they can move, Sarah reported after ending a secure call. Agent Keller is building a case, but jurisdictional issues are slowing the process. Connor can't wait for bureaucracy. Vaughn began assembling specialized equipment, non-lethal weapons, communications gear, and infiltration tools. Plan B activates now. That's 3 steps ahead of where we should be, Marcus objected. The body hasn't even been cremated yet. They're sending mercenaries after my son, Vaughn replied, checking the charge on a specialized taser designed for military applications. The timeline just changed. As night fell over Washington, 3 separate plans accelerated toward collision. Layla and Pierce prepared to secure Connor and eliminate any obstacles. Detective Reeves gathered evidence of a complex murder conspiracy, and Vaughn mobilized to protect his son at any cost. In the darkness, Vaughn activated a secure line to Gloria. They're moving on Connor tonight. Delay the cremation by any means necessary. I need that body as evidence. Already handled, Gloria replied. Judge Sanders has agreed to review the expedited cremation order. That gives us until morning at least. And Connor's custody? Emergency hearing scheduled for 9 a.m. I've submitted DNA evidence proving paternity, but Novak is still assigned to the case. We'll deal with Novak, Vaughn assured her. Just keep the legal channels open while I secure Connor. As he ended the call, Vaughn studied the surveillance feeds showing his own home, where Layla, Pierce, and their conspirators believed they were celebrating their perfect crime, unaware that their target was not only alive, but watching their every move. Their overconfidence would be their downfall. In the shadow world where Vaughn had once operated, appearing weak when you were strong was the ultimate tactical advantage. Chapter 6. Forced Retreat. Vaughn's careful planning unraveled when Layla accelerated the timeline beyond what even he had anticipated. Through Judge Novak, she obtained an emergency custody order for Connor, citing acute psychological distress requiring immediate maternal care following his father's death. This is highly irregular, Headmaster Phillips protested when Layla arrived at Westridge Academy, flanked by 2 men identifying themselves as family court officers. We have strict protocols regarding student release, especially given Mr. Miller's recent instructions, which no longer apply, Layla replied, her brief performance replaced by cold efficiency as she presented the court order bearing Novak's signature. My son needs to be with his mother during this tragedy. Frank Morales intervened, his military bearing unchanged by his civilian security uniform. I'll need to verify this documentation, ma'am. Perhaps you could wait in the administration building while I make some calls. That won't be necessary, said the taller of the 2 men accompanying Layla. He produced a badge identifying himself as a federal marshal. This order has been validated by the court. Interference constitutes obstruction of justice. When Frank hesitated, reaching for his phone, the second man moved with unexpected speed, driving a concealed stun gun into the security chief's ribs. As Frank collapsed, the first man produced a syringe. What are you doing? Phillips demanded, backing away from the violence. Ensuring compliance, the man replied calmly, injecting Frank with a sedative before turning to the headmaster. Now, where is Connor Miller? Across campus, Connor received Vaughn's warning and immediately sought public spaces, joining a group of students in the library. When his name was called over the intercom, he ignored it, moving deeper into the stacks where the library security camera offered protection through visibility. Using the encrypted messaging app, he updated his father. They're looking for me. Announcements calling me to the office. Stay visible, Vaughn replied. Help is coming. Remember our panic phrase, if anyone approaches. At Westridge, Frank Morales regained consciousness in the security office, his head pounding from the fall. He immediately accessed the emergency protocol Vaughn had established, activating a silent alarm to Marcus's team positioned near campus. We've lost visual on Connor, Marcus reported to Vaughn, nursing a bruised jaw after attempting to intercept Layla's team at the campus entrance. They're searching the buildings systematically. The marshals are professionals, military-trained, not actual law enforcement. Track Layla, Vaughn instructed, monitoring the feeds from his command center. The device in her necklace should show her location. Signal shows they're heading toward Pierce's lake house upstate, Sarah reported, triangulating the tracking data. Approximately 90 minutes from Westridge. They don't have Connor yet, Vaughn realized. They're preparing a secure location first while their team continues searching. Simultaneously, Gloria called with worse news. They've frozen all your accounts with emergency court orders claiming probate necessities. And they've scheduled cremation for tomorrow morning to destroy evidence. Can you delay it? I've filed emergency motions, but Novak's blocking everything. And there's more. Pierce has filed for emergency guardianship of Connor, claiming psychological evaluation shows the boy is traumatized and needs immediate psychiatric care. If granted, they could essentially medicate him into compliance. Vaughn felt cold fury building. Where's the hearing? That's the problem. It's in chambers. Private hearing with only Judge Novak present. Scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Send everything you have to Detective Reeves, Vaughn instructed. And contact Judge Sanders directly. Tell him this involves judicial misconduct by Novak. At Westridge, Connor managed to evade capture for nearly 2 hours by moving between public spaces, the library, the dining hall, the main quad, always surrounded by other students or faculty. But as evening approached, the search intensified. Connor Miller, a voice called as he exited the science building. One of the men posing as a marshal approached, his smile professionally reassuring. Your mother's worried about you. She's waiting at the administration building. Orange elephants fly backwards, Connor replied, the nonsensical phrase the panic signal he and his father had established years ago. The man's expression hardened slightly. I understand this is difficult, but you need to come with me now. Connor bolted, sprinting across the quad toward the athletic fields where an evening lacrosse practice offered witnesses and safety in numbers. The man pursued, speaking urgently into a concealed microphone. At the lake house, Pierce prepared a room for Connor's arrival, arranging sedatives and restraints with clinical detachment. Once we have him here, the psychiatric evaluation will proceed without interference, he explained to Layla. Judge Novak has already agreed to approve commitment to Riverside Psychiatric based on my diagnosis. How long until we secure the inheritance? Layla asked, her mask of maternal concern completely abandoned in private. 4 weeks for probate with Novak expediting the process. Once Connor is declared mentally incompetent with a diagnosis of hereditary psychosis, conveniently matching his father's paranoid delusions, you'll have complete control of the estate as his guardian. Layla smiled, pouring herself a glass of champagne. 15 years in foster care made Vaughn so desperate for family that he never questioned anything. Not my background, not your qualifications, nothing. His weakness was always his sentimentality, Pierce agreed. The same reason we need to secure the boy. Vaughn made him the primary beneficiary of everything. At the monitoring station, Vaughn watched this exchange with cold rage. They don't have Connor yet, he told Marcus over the secure line. But they're preparing the lake house for his arrival. My team has intercepted their mercenaries at Westridge, Marcus reported. Connor is secure with us, but campus security called local police. We need to move quickly. Bring him to Extraction Point Alpha, Vaughn instructed. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. Before Vaughn could depart, his tactical planning was disrupted when the monitoring system detected multiple vehicles approaching the farmhouse, serving as their command center. Thermal imaging showed 8 figures advancing through the surrounding woods, a professional tactical team with military-grade equipment. They found us, Sarah announced, initiating emergency protocols. Perimeter breach in approximately 3 minutes. How? Vaughn demanded, already gathering essential evidence and equipment. Facial recognition, Sarah suggested, pointing to a security camera playback showing Marcus purchasing supplies at a nearby gas station, where they traced Connor's encrypted device. They're better connected than we thought. Vaughn's safe house was compromised when Trent's hired mercenaries breached the perimeter. The ensuing firefight left Marcus wounded and Vaughn barely escaping with essential evidence. They're better connected than we anticipated, Vaughn admitted, treating Marcus's shoulder wound in an abandoned hunting cabin 10 miles from their compromised location. Pierce must have other wealthy accomplices protecting their operation. They wanted me alive, Marcus noted grimly, wincing as Vaughn bandaged his wound. Their orders were to capture, not kill. They want to know who else is involved. Sarah Mason called with disturbing news. They've locked down Sentinel Defense. The board received documents showing you transferred controlling interest to Layla 3 months ago. The signatures look legitimate. Forgeries, Vaughn muttered, using samples from my contract signatures. There's worse news. They're selling classified project data to foreign interests. I've tracked 3 data transfers to known shell companies for Chinese military contractors. This isn't just about my money, Vaughn realized. They're selling national security assets. Sarah's voice lowered. I've initiated black protocols on the secure servers. If they attempt to access the classified databases, the system will corrupt the data while appearing to function normally. But that's temporary at best. Detective Reeves, following her instincts despite pressure from her superiors to drop the case, discovered the body at the morgue wasn't Vaughn Miller. Before she could act on this information, she was placed on administrative leave, her evidence confiscated. Determined, Detective Reeves contacted Gloria Winslow directly, meeting in an underground parking garage reminiscent of historical whistleblower encounters. I know Miller's alive, Reeves stated without preamble, and I know what Pierce and his sister are doing. This isn't their first victim, it's just the first one who fought back. If hypothetically Miller were alive, Gloria responded carefully, what would you need to take down the entire operation? Evidence connecting Pierce to the previous victims. Proof of identity fraud. Financial transactions showing the pattern. I might know someone who can help with that, Gloria said, glancing at her secure phone with Vaughn's latest encrypted message. At Pierce's lake house, Connor was finally brought in, his resistance evident in his disheveled appearance and the bruise forming on his cheek. Despite Layla's attempts to convince him Vaughn was never his biological father, Connor remained defiant. Your so-called father was paranoid and dangerous, Pierce explained with false compassion as Connor sat rigidly on a leather sofa. These delusions about poisoning were symptoms of his deteriorating mental state. Then why don't you let me see the body? Connor demanded. Cremation is scheduled for tomorrow, Layla said smoothly. It's what he wanted. When Connor continued challenging them, Pierce prepared a syringe. This will help you rest. You're clearly in shock from your father's death. I'm not taking that, Connor backed away. It's not optional. Connor. Pierce advanced with Trent moving to restrain the boy. In a move Vaughn had taught him, Connor feigned compliance, then bolted through the patio doors, sprinting for the boathouse at the edge of the property. Locking himself inside, he activated the emergency beacon hidden in his watch, another of Vaughn's precautions. He's becoming problematic, Pierce noted coldly as Trent returned from an unsuccessful search of the boathouse. The sedative dose needs to be increased. We can't risk an overdose, Layla objected. Not until the inheritance is secured. He's 14 and traumatized, Pierce countered. A sedative overdose would be tragic, but unsurprising given his emotional state following his father's death. That night, Connor feigned sleep while activating the encrypted messaging app. Lake House. North bedroom. Window faces dock. 2 guards. They tried to inject me with something. Help. Vaughn, face darkening with rage, prepared specialized equipment from his military days. They've taken my son. This ends now. Marcus, despite his injury, checked his weapon. What's the plan? We end this permanently, Vaughn said, his voice cold as he opened a case containing specialized infiltration equipment. And we make sure they can never threaten another family again. Meanwhile, Detective Reeves presented her evidence to FBI Special Agent Thomas Keller, who specialized in serial homicide investigations. This isn't just financial crime, she explained, spreading photographs and documents across his desk. We're looking at multiple homicides across state lines. Pierce and his accomplices have killed at least 3 wealthy men using the same method they attempted with Vaughn Miller. And you believe Miller is still alive? Keller asked skeptically. The dental records from the body don't match. The cremation was rushed. Every witness who might question the identification has been threatened or bribed. Reeves pushed a file across the table. And there's this security footage showing someone matching Miller's description accessing his company's lab 3 days after his supposed death. Agent Keller studied the grainy image. If you're right, we're looking at a massive conspiracy involving murder, identity theft, fraud, and espionage. With a 14-year-old boy caught in the middle, Reeves added grimly, checking her watch. And we have less than 6 hours before they destroy the body that could prove it all. As dawn approached, Vaughn prepared to infiltrate Pierce's lake house from the water. Years of Delta Force operations had taught him how to approach an enemy that believed they had already won. His expression was calm but determined as he checked his equipment one final time. You're going in alone? Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. One man has advantages a team doesn't, Vaughn replied, his focus absolute. And they're not expecting a ghost. The rising sun painted the horizon crimson as Vaughn loaded his equipment into a small boat. If I'm not back with Connor by noon, deliver the evidence package to Agent Keller and activate Contingency Protocol Echo. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. What about Layla and Pierce? They wanted to play with death, Vaughn said, his voice cold with purpose. It's time they met it face to face. Chapter 7. Lethal Precision. Under cover of darkness, Vaughn Miller approached Pierce's lake house from the water. The property stood isolated on a wooded peninsula, its location chosen for privacy rather than defense, a critical oversight Vaughn intended to exploit. He guided the boat with practiced silence, the electric outboard motor barely disturbing the water's surface as he navigated toward the private dock. Through night vision goggles, he studied the property's layout. The main house stood 300 yards from the shoreline, its windows glowing with warm light that belied the darkness within. A boathouse hugged the water's edge, its weathered structure offering perfect concealment for his approach. Vaughn had memorized the property blueprints, identifying blind spots in the security system through codes extracted from Pierce's phone metadata. What appeared to be comprehensive protection, motion sensors, cameras, alarm contacts, contained deliberate vulnerabilities that allowed Pierce to move drugs and evidence without detection. Now those same gaps would permit Vaughn's infiltration. He secured the boat beneath the dock and removed his equipment with practiced efficiency. Years of Delta Force operations had honed his movements to minimal necessity. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. He applied camouflage to his face with quick strokes, the familiar ritual centering him for what lay ahead. Through thermal imaging, he identified 5 individuals inside the house, Layla and Pierce in the master bedroom, their heat signatures distinct and separated, Trent in the guest room, and 2 guards patrolling the main floor. Connor's heat signature showed him awake in the north bedroom, though lying still enough to appear asleep to casual observation. Vaughn moved along the tree line, using natural cover to approach the house from its southern exposure where fewer windows faced the forest. The property's security system would automatically log any deactivation, so instead of disabling it, he used Pierce's own access codes to create a maintenance loop in the cameras covering his approach path. The first guard appeared in Vaughn's infrared sight, a burly figure holding a pistol too casually for a professional. A hired thug rather than trained security. The man patrolled the perimeter with predictable timing, checking his watch repeatedly, bored and inattentive. When the guard rounded the corner, Vaughn struck. A hand clamped over the man's mouth, while a pressure point technique rendered him unconscious without injury. Vaughn secured him with zip ties, then planted a small device in the guard's pocket, a USB drive containing falsified evidence linking him to previous murders. Insurance, should anything go wrong. The second guard proved equally susceptible. Distracted by his phone, he never sensed Vaughn's approach until a chokehold cut off his carotid blood flow. Within seconds, he collapsed without a sound. Vaughn secured him in the tool shed, using the guard's own restraints against him. With the external threats neutralized, Vaughn accessed the house through the mudroom door using the keypad code extracted from Pierce's metadata. Inside, the house stood quiet except for classical music playing softly from hidden speakers, Chopin's Nocturnes, the same music Pierce had played in his office while discussing Vaughn's treatment. Moving through the darkened kitchen, Vaughn paused as a figure entered from the hallway. Trent Baxter stood at the counter, carefully measuring white powder into a glass of water. The intended destination was obvious, Connor's room. That better not be what I think it is, Vaughn whispered, pressing a knife against Trent's kidney. Trent froze, the measuring spoon hovering above the glass. His face drained of color as he turned slightly, enough to see Vaughn's camouflaged face in the dim light. You're dead. Not even close. But you will be if that's meant for my son. It's just a mild sedative, Trent whispered, his voice cracking. Pierce's orders. The kid was resistant to the injections. Put it down. Slowly. Trent complied, placing the spoon beside the glass with trembling hands. Where's my son? Vaughn pressed the knife slightly harder, enough for Trent to feel its potential. North bedroom. Second floor. They've got him locked in, but he's unharmed. They need him alive until the custody transfer. Vaughn forced Trent to his knees, securing his wrists with zip ties before applying a sedative patch to his neck, one of Pierce's own medical supplies, fitting justice. Within seconds, Trent slumped unconscious. After securing Trent, Vaughn planted surveillance devices throughout the house, capturing incriminating conversations between the still sleeping Layla and Pierce as they discussed their next targets and the disposal of Connor once they secured Vaughn's assets. The Stevens acquisition looks promising, Pierce said, his voice carrying from the master bedroom. Widower, 2 children from previous marriage, estimated net worth $80 million. 2 children complicates things, Layla replied, her voice lacking any trace of the warmth she'd feigned during their marriage. We'd need Trent to handle the custody interference again, or we accelerate the timeline. With Miller's resources, we could expand operations considerably. International targets offer fewer complications. Vaughn continued his search, locating Pierce's home office adjacent to the master bedroom. The room contained expensive medical journals arranged for display rather than use, credentials framed on walls, and a mahogany desk with a single computer. Behind a reproduction Monet, Vaughn discovered a hidden wall safe. Using specialized equipment, he bypassed the electronic lock, revealing a cache of incriminating evidence. Medical records of past victims, identity documents for multiple aliases, offshore account information, and detailed plans for assuming control of Sentinel Defense's classified technologies. Most disturbing was a file labeled Connor Contingency, containing plans to commit the boy to a psychiatric facility under Pierce's care if he continued resisting, and eventually staging an unfortunate accident once the inheritance was secured. The file included forged psychological evaluations, backdated therapy sessions, and prescription records for medications Connor had never taken. Vaughn photographed each document, uploading them to a secure server accessible to both Gloria and Detective Reeves. The evidence was damning, not just of murder and fraud, but of a systematic operation targeting wealthy individuals across multiple states. A notation in Pierce's calendar drew Vaughn's attention. A scheduled meeting with a Chinese technology broker identified only as Zhao for the transfer of the Sentinel Defense encryption protocols. National security implications extended far beyond personal revenge. This wasn't merely about Vaughn's money. It was about selling America's military secrets. Moving to the boathouse, Vaughn accessed Pierce's second hidden office, a workspace designed for activities that couldn't risk discovery at his medical practice. Here, he found a laboratory set up for preparing undetectable toxins, correspondence with foreign military officials regarding classified defense technologies, and comprehensive dossiers on potential future targets. A laptop contained emails between Pierce and foreign military contacts, negotiating prices for Sentinel Defense's prototype drone encryption system, technology that could compromise U.S. field operations if acquired by hostile nations. Vaughn copied the files, adding them to the evidence being compiled for federal authorities. As he worked, Vaughn monitored Connor's room through a small camera he'd placed in the air vent. His son sat awake despite the late hour, staring at the door with determined vigilance. The boy had positioned furniture against the door, a basic barricade technique Vaughn had taught him during their security games years earlier. Meanwhile, Gloria met with Judge Sanders, who outranked Novak in the judicial hierarchy. She presented evidence of Novak's corruption, including offshore payments coinciding with suspicious custody rulings. I want an emergency injunction against all orders issued by Judge Novak in the Miller case, Gloria demanded, pushing a thick folder across the desk, and a warrant for exhumation and toxicology screening. Sanders, a man whose silver hair matched his sterling reputation for judicial propriety, reviewed the documents with increasing concern. These are serious allegations against a sitting judge. They're about to sell classified military technology to foreign interests, Gloria countered. And they've murdered at least 3 other men using the same method. The evidence is comprehensive. Judge Sanders studied the financial records showing payments to Novak from shell companies linked to Trent Baxter, then reached for his phone. I'm contacting the FBI. This goes beyond judicial misconduct. Detective Reeves, though suspended, delivered her case files to FBI Special Agent Thomas Keller, who specialized in serial homicide investigations. Their meeting in a federal building downtown carried the urgency of national security implications. This isn't just financial crime, she explained, spreading surveillance photos across his desk. We're looking at multiple homicides across state lines. Pierce and his accomplices have killed at least 3 wealthy men using the same method they attempted with Von Miller. And you believe Miller is still alive? Keller asked skeptically. The dental records from the body don't match. The cremation was rushed. Every witness who might question the identification has been threatened or bribed. Reeves pushed a file across the table. And there's this, security footage showing someone matching Miller's description accessing his company's lab 3 days after his supposed death. Agent Keller studied the grainy image of a man whose posture and build matched Vaughn's, entering a secure laboratory using valid credentials. If you're right, we're looking at a massive conspiracy involving murder, identity theft, fraud, and espionage. With a 14-year-old boy caught in the middle, Reeves added grimly. Back at the lake house, Vaughn activated a specialized device that jammed all outgoing communications, isolating the property completely. He then systematically photographed and documented all evidence before uploading it to the secure server. With the ground floor secured, Vaughn moved silently up the stairs toward Connor's room. The house remained quiet, Pierce and Layla still asleep, unaware that their security had been compromised. The lock on Connor's door yielded easily to specialized tools. Vaughn eased the door open, finding Connor alert and ready with an improvised weapon, a table lamp gripped like a club. "Dad?" he whispered in disbelief. "I promised I'd always protect you," Vaughn said softly. "No matter what. They said you were dead. They tried their best." Vaughn handed him a small device. "Put this in your pocket. It's a tracker. No matter what happens next, don't react when you see me. Follow my lead." Connor nodded solemnly. "They've been talking about sending me away to some facility. Pierce keeps wanting to give me injections." "That's not happening," Vaughn promised, his expression hardening. "I need you to be brave for a little longer. When the time comes, run toward the blue flashing lights. Don't look back." After ensuring Connor understood the plan, Vaughn returned to his surveillance position. Outside, the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. The final act would begin with the rising sun. Chapter 8. Forced Confrontation. At sunrise, Layla entered Connor's room with a cheerful facade that didn't reach her eyes. Her silk robes swished against the doorframe as she switched on the lights with theatrical brightness. "Time for breakfast, sweetheart. Dr. Pierce made your favorite waffles." Connor followed her downstairs, maintaining the composure Vaughn had instructed. In the kitchen, Pierce stood at the counter arranging food on plates, his movements precise as he added blueberries in a perfect circle. His smile faltered when he glanced toward the patio doors, noting the absence of the guards who should have been visible on patrol. "Where's Trent?" Layla asked, pulling orange juice from the refrigerator. "Probably still sleeping," Pierce responded, though his eyes darted nervously toward the windows. He was up late making arrangements for tomorrow's transfer. Connor sat at the table, his posture deliberately subdued as he observed their increasing anxiety. When Pierce placed a plate in front of him, Connor stared at the food without touching it. "You need to eat," Pierce insisted, his professional demeanor slipping slightly. "You'll need your strength for the journey." "Journey?" Connor asked cautiously. "We've arranged for you to visit a special facility," Layla explained, her voice carrying the smooth practice of rehearsed lines. "Just for a few weeks. To help you process your grief." "You mean lock me away so you can steal my father's money?" Connor replied, pushing the plate away. "I'm not hungry." Pierce's expression tightened. "Your emotional response is understandable but misguided. The toxicology reports clearly showed your father suffered from paranoid delusions caused by environmental poisoning. We're concerned you might be exhibiting similar symptoms." "Then show me the reports," Connor challenged, remembering his father's instructions to stall for time. Before Pierce could respond, the distinctive wail of sirens pierced the morning silence. Through the windows, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the driveway. "What's happening?" Layla demanded, mask slipping as panic set in. Agent Keller's voice boomed through a megaphone. "FBI, we have a warrant for the arrest of Warren Pierce and Layla Miller. Come out with your hands up." Pierce lunged for a hidden drawer beneath the kitchen counter, extracting a handgun. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Connor, pressing a syringe to his neck. "Nobody's going anywhere. Tell them we have a hostage." "You're hurting me," Connor said calmly, playing his role perfectly while positioning himself according to Vaughn's instructions. "Shut up," Pierce hissed, dragging Connor toward the back door. "The boat's our only chance now." Layla's composure cracked completely. Her southern accent disappeared entirely, replaced by the harsher tones of her true personality. "This wasn't the plan. You said it would look natural. Now we're facing federal charges." "Shut up," Pierce shouted. "If they have enough for arrest warrants," someone talked. "It's time for our contingency plan." "You mean my son?" Vaughn's voice came from the hallway as he stepped into view, aiming a pistol. "I don't think so." Pierce's face contorted in disbelief. "Impossible. I watched you die. Yet here I stand." Vaughn's voice remained unervingly calm. "Release my son, Warren, or I'll show you exactly why my military file remains sealed." "Stay back." Pierce pressed the needle closer to Connor's neck. "One more step and I inject him." "You've got it backward, Doctor," Vaughn responded, nodding slightly to Connor. Understanding the signal, Connor executed the defensive move Vaughn had taught him years ago, dropping his weight suddenly while twisting, breaking Pierce's grip and rolling clear. Before Pierce could react, Vaughn fired with perfect accuracy, the bullet striking Pierce's shoulder, incapacitating him without killing. Layla lunged for the fallen syringe, but Detective Reeves appeared in the doorway, weapon drawn. "Don't even think about it, Elaine Pittman. That's your real name, isn't it?" As federal agents breached the house, Vaughn embraced Connor. "It's over. You're safe now." Agent Keller approached with Detective Reeves. "Mr. Miller, we have quite a few questions about how you're standing here when we have a death certificate with your name on it." "I imagine you do," Vaughn replied. "But first, I believe you'll find Trent Baxter in the boathouse with extensive evidence of their previous victims. And these," Vaughn handed Keller a flash drive, "records of their attempts to sell classified defense technology to foreign interests. I believe that falls under your jurisdiction as well." FBI agents secured the scene, medics attended to Pierce's wound, and Connor remained glued to his father's side, unwilling to let him out of sight. Layla was handcuffed and led toward the waiting vehicles, her clothes absurdly inappropriate for the steel bracelets around her wrists. As agents secured Pierce and Layla lashed out at Vaughn. "You think you've won? You're nothing. A foster kid playing pretend as a big corporate success. Connor deserves better than you." Connor stood tall beside his father. "I already have the best father, and he just saved my life." Vaughn guided Connor away from the chaos, his arm protectively around his son's shoulders. "Let's go home." Home was compromised, Connor pointed out, displaying the tactical awareness Vaughn had instilled in him. "Where will we stay?" "Somewhere safe while we sort this out," Vaughn assured him. "Gloria's arranged temporary accommodations until we can establish a new secure residence." Agent Keller approached them before they could leave. "Mr. Miller, we still need your statement about how you faked your death and what evidence led you to these conclusions." "My attorney will provide full cooperation," Vaughn replied. "But my son needs medical attention and rest first." "Dad, I'm fine," Connor protested. "Humor me," Vaughn said. "We don't know what they might have already given you." Detective Reeves joined them, her expression a mix of professional satisfaction and genuine concern. "We'll need comprehensive blood tests. Pierce's history suggests he may have administered unknown substances." "Already arranged," Vaughn confirmed. "Dr. Alan Mercer is expecting us at his laboratory." As they prepared to depart, Sarah Mason arrived with Marcus, who was still recovering from his shoulder wound but insisted on being present for the operation's conclusion. "Sentinel defense is secure," Sarah reported. "I've initiated emergency protocols to lock down all classified projects until we can assess what information they may have compromised." "And the board?" Vaughn asked. "Shocked to discover you're alive, but relieved. The stock dropped 20% after news of your death. It should recover once we issue a statement explaining the circumstances." Marcus approached Connor with a slight grin. "You executed that defensive maneuver perfectly. Your dad teach you that?" Connor nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "He called it the Belgrade slip. Said it saved his life once. Twice now," Marcus corrected, exchanging a meaningful look with Vaughn. As they left the property, Vaughn glanced back at Pierce being loaded into an ambulance under armed guard. Their eyes met briefly, Pierce's filled with hatred and fear, Vaughn's with the cold certainty of justice served. "Is it really over?" Connor asked quietly as they drove away from the lake house. "The immediate danger is," Vaughn replied honestly. "The legal process will take longer. There will be questions, investigations, trials. Will I have to testify? Possibly. But Gloria will ensure your involvement is minimized." Connor fell silent for several minutes, processing everything that had happened. Finally, he asked the question Vaughn had been expecting. "Did you know? About Mom, I mean. Before all this." Vaughn chose his words carefully. "I suspected something was wrong with my health. The connection to her came later. She wasn't even my real mother, was she?" Connor's voice cracked slightly. "Biology doesn't make a parent," Vaughn said firmly. "Her choices do. And those choices revealed who she truly was." The car fell silent again as they continued toward Washington, where the next phase would begin, the complex process of rebuilding their lives while ensuring justice was served. Vaughn knew from experience that surviving the immediate threat was often easier than navigating the aftermath. But as he glanced at his son beside him, Vaughn felt something he hadn't experienced since before the poisoning began: hope. They had survived the worst together. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way. Chapter 9. Calculated Justice. 6 months later, the courtroom fell silent as Judge Sanders delivered the verdict. Reporters filled the back rows, pencils poised to capture the conclusion of what the Washington Post had dubbed the Poison Conspiracy, a case that had captivated the public with its combination of attempted murder, identity theft, and espionage. Dr. Warren Pierce received multiple life sentences without parole for first-degree murder, attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and espionage. The evidence Vaughn had gathered proved decisive, connecting Pierce to the deaths of 3 previous victims through DNA evidence, financial records, and his own meticulous notes. Layla Miller, now confirmed as Elaine Pittman through DNA testing. received 40 years for her role as accomplice and conspirator in multiple homicides. Her composed facade had finally crumbled during cross-examination when Gloria Winslow presented evidence of the real Layla Morgan's disappearance 15 years earlier. Trent Baxter, in exchange for testimony against his co-conspirators, received 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. His cooperation had proved invaluable in mapping the entire network of accomplices, including medical examiners, court clerks, and financial advisors who had facilitated previous murders. Judge Novak, caught in the expanding investigation, faced his own trial for judicial misconduct, bribery, and conspiracy, his legal career and reputation destroyed by evidence of 23 instances where he had ruled in favor of parties who made payments to his offshore accounts. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Vaughn and Connor. Gloria deftly managed the press conference, portraying Vaughn as both victim and hero who gathered evidence at great personal risk. Mr. Miller's military background equipped him to recognize and document the poisoning attempt while appearing to succumb to it, she explained to the assembled journalists. His actions have brought justice to multiple families whose loved ones were murdered by this conspiracy. Cameras flashed as Vaughn stood beside Connor, both dressed in identical Navy suits Gloria had selected for the occasion. They presented a united front, father and son who had survived an extraordinary betrayal. Mr. Miller, how did you first suspect your wife was poisoning you? Called a reporter from the front row. No questions about the specifics of the case, Gloria interjected smoothly. The investigation is ongoing regarding additional conspirators. After the press conference, Detective Reeves, now promoted to a special FBI task force investigating similar cases nationwide, approached Vaughn in the courthouse corridor. We've identified 7 more victims across 5 states, she informed him quietly. Your evidence created a template for recognizing the pattern. You've saved lives beyond your own. Any connection to foreign intelligence? Vaughn asked, keeping his voice low. That investigation continues, Reeves confirmed. Pierce's contacts extended further than we initially thought. The technology they attempted to sell would have compromised military operations in 3 countries. Sarah Mason, now acting CEO of Sentinel Defense during Vaughn's recovery, joined them with an update on company operations. The board unanimously voted to retain you as CEO, she told him. And the Defense Department has renewed all contracts with additional security clearances. Your exposure of the espionage attempt actually strengthened our position with government clients. And the employees? Relieved and loyal. Your return from the dead is becoming corporate legend. Sarah smiled slightly. Though HR is still figuring out how to handle your life insurance payout. Marcus, fully recovered, approached with news of his own. The foundation is operational, he reported. We've established contact with families of the other victims, providing resources for navigating the legal aftermath. After Vaughn's return from the dead, he had established a foundation supporting families of Pierce's other victims, funded by his personal resources. The foundation also provided resources for identifying and preventing similar schemes targeting vulnerable wealthy individuals. The Stevens family from Chicago sent particular thanks, Marcus continued. The father's death 3 years ago left the children in legal limbo when the widow contested the will. Our legal team has helped restore their inheritance. And the security protocols? Vaughn asked. Implemented at 5 residential care facilities so far. 2 more scheduled next month. Marcus referred to the specialized monitoring systems Vaughn had developed to prevent medical abuse in institutional settings. We're calling it the Miller Protocol in your honor, despite your objections. That evening, in their new home secured by state-of-the-art systems, Connor looked at Vaughn across the dinner table. The residence, a modernist structure of glass and steel reinforced with ballistic materials, stood as a testament to Vaughn's unwillingness to take security for granted again. Do you think Mom ever loved either of us? Connor asked quietly, pushing pasta around his plate. Vaughn considered the question carefully. I believe she loved what we represented: security, status, wealth. Real love doesn't try to destroy what it claims to cherish. The therapist says I might always have trust issues because of what happened, Connor admitted. Trust should be earned, not given blindly, Vaughn responded. That's not an issue, it's wisdom. But don't let their betrayal close your heart completely. Connor nodded, absorbing this perspective. Coach says I'm playing with more aggression lately. Said it might be good for lacrosse, but wondered if I should process my feelings. And what did you tell him? That I'm processing just fine. Connor replied with a hint of his father's determination. Different doesn't mean worse. Later, Vaughn met with Marcus, now heading security for Sentinel Defense. They sat in Vaughn's home office, reviewing operations for the company's new security division. Pierce was transferred to Rockpoint Maximum Security yesterday, Marcus reported. Coincidentally, The brother of his second victim is serving time there for unrelated charges. Word of Pierce's crimes has already spread through the population. And Layla? Vaughn asked, expression unreadable. Women's correctional. Her cellmate lost custody of her children due to a suspiciously similar custody ruling by Judge Novak 5 years ago. Small world. Vaughn nodded slightly. Indeed. At Sentinel Defense, Vaughn implemented a new corporate division focused on counterintelligence and security systems designed to protect vulnerable individuals from similar predatory schemes. The technology, originally developed for his personal protection, became a new product line generating substantial revenue while helping potential victims. The Pentagon has expressed particular interest in the authentication protocols, Sarah reported during their executive meeting. The combination of biometric and behavioral analysis makes identity theft virtually impossible. Connor, thriving back at Westridge Academy, established a peer support group for students with traumatic family experiences, channeling his own ordeal into helping others. Frank Morales, recovered from his injuries, now oversaw an enhanced security protocol at the school, named the Miller Protocol, in recognition of the case that inspired it. Your son has remarkable resilience, Frank told Vaughn during Parents' Weekend. He's turned his experience into something positive for others. Not many adults could do that, let alone a 14-year-old. 3 days later, Detective Reeves, now promoted to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, visited Vaughn with one final question. They walked through the sculpture garden outside Sentinel Defense Headquarters, where spring flowers provided color against the steel and glass backdrop. The medical examiner never determined how you survived arsenic levels that should have been fatal, she mentioned casually. Care to explain that mystery? Vaughn smiled enigmatically. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, Detective. But I'll tell you what I told my son. There are advantages to specialized military training that don't appear in any file, sealed or otherwise. As she left, Vaughn returned to his office where Connor waited after school. On his desk sat a framed photo from Connor's recent science competition, alongside a foundation charter for families affected by similar crimes. You know, Connor said without looking up from his homework, I always thought your bedtime stories about being some kind of super soldier were just stories. Vaughn laughed genuinely. Most of them were. But not all. Not all, Vaughn conceded, his expression softening. Some skills you hope never to use again, until someone threatens what matters most. Connor nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad you're my father. My real father. Always, Vaughn promised. Nothing will ever change that. Later that evening, an unmarked envelope arrived containing prison surveillance photos showing Pierce's battered face after an unfortunate incident in the shower area. Another photo showed Layla's terrified expression as she was cornered in the prison yard. Vaughn burned the photos in the fireplace, watching the flames consume the final evidence of his influence. Some forms of justice remained unspoken, a lesson from his classified past that served his family well. Nobody threatens what he loves and escapes consequence. Nobody. A week later, Vaughn finalized a significant donation to the foster care system that once raised him, establishing pathways to help children find permanent homes and avoid the insecurity that had marked his early years. Why do this now? Gloria asked during the signing. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just defeating your enemies, Vaughn replied, watching Connor mentor a younger student through the window. It's building something stronger than what they tried to destroy. In his private office, Vaughn closed the final file on the Pierce-Pittman conspiracy. The classified dossier contained details that would never see a courtroom, aspects of his military background that had proven essential to surviving their plot. These skills, honed in places like Belgrade and Damascus, had once been used to protect his country. Now they had saved his family. Connor appeared in the doorway, lacrosse stick in hand. Dad, you promised to help me practice before the championship game. Vaughn looked up from the past and toward the future. Let's go. As they walked toward the home field Vaughn had built behind their new house, Connor asked the question that had lingered between them. Will we ever talk about what really happened? The parts that didn't make it into the official reports. Vaughn considered his son's maturity, so accelerated by recent events. Someday, when you're older, some truths are burdens that require preparation. Connor nodded, accepting this answer. Fair enough. But promise me one thing. What's that? When you do tell me, don't leave anything out, no matter how dark it gets. Vaughn studied his son's face, recognizing the unflinching courage that mirrored his own. I promise. The full truth, when the time comes. They continued toward the field, father and son bound by more than biology, connected by survival, secrets, and the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of betrayal. They had emerged stronger, wiser, and more vigilant. And in the shadowed corners of two prisons, Warren Pierce and Elaine Pittman learned the brutal lesson that Vaughn's enemies had discovered in war zones across the world. Some men appear civilized until threatened, and then reveal the training and determination that makes them truly dangerous. Vaughn Miller, the foster child who became a Delta operator who became a corporate leader, had defeated their poison with the antidote of preparation. Now he would ensure his son grew up understanding that the greatest security came not from walls or systems, but from the vigilance of those who loved you enough to see the threats others missed. Epilogue. 15 years later. Vaughn Miller stood at the edge of the lacrosse field, watching the University of Virginia team practice with focused intensity. At 57, his hair had turned silver at the temples, but his posture remained military straight, his physique still reflecting the discipline that had saved his life decades earlier. Only the faint tremor in his right hand, a permanent reminder of the arsenic that had nearly killed him, betrayed the ordeal that had changed the trajectory of his life. Dad. Vaughn turned to see Connor approaching from the athletics building. At 29, his son had grown into a man who resembled him in stance and bearing, though his features carried echoes of a mother who had never truly existed. Connor's coaching uniform bore the university's colors and logo, associate head coach, a position he'd earned through merit rather than his family name. Practice looks sharp, Vaughn commented as they shook hands. Your defense is impressive. National championship caliber, I hope, Connor replied. We've implemented some of those zone strategies we discussed last month. They walked toward the parking lot where Vaughn's vehicle waited, an armored SUV with specialized security features that had become standard for executives of his stature. Some habits of vigilance never faded, even 15 years after the threat had been neutralized. Sarah called this morning, Vaughn said as they reached the car. The Horizon merger is finalized. Sentinel Horizon Defense will formally launch next quarter. Largest defense tech company in the Western Hemisphere, Connor noted. Quite the legacy, Dad. Your legacy, too, when you're ready, Vaughn reminded him. The board position remains open. Connor smiled, the expression genuine but tinged with the complexity of their shared past. After the championship, I promised these kids my full attention until then. They drove through Charlottesville toward the private airfield where Vaughn's jet waited. The landscape rolled past in peaceful contrast to the memories that still occasionally surfaced. Pierce pressing a syringe to Connor's neck, Layla's cold calculation as she measured poison into Vaughn's coffee. The firefight that had left Marcus wounded as they escaped their compromised safe house. How's your mother? Connor asked, the question carrying layers of meaning beyond its simple words. Vaughn glanced at his son, appreciating his thoughtfulness. 5 years after the trials, Connor had begun referring to Gloria Winslow as Vaughn's mother, after the attorney had taken on a maternal role in their reconstructed family. The woman who had been Vaughn's lawyer had become much more, a trusted confidant, partner, and eventually wife. Terrorizing the Supreme Court this week, Vaughn replied with a smile. Her arguments in the Parker case have made quite the impression. Gloria's ascension to the federal judiciary had surprised many who knew her only as a ruthless corporate attorney. Her extensive work with victims of the Pierce-Pittman conspiracy had revealed a passion for justice that transcended her earlier career. At 77, she remained as formidable as when she had helped Vaughn navigate the legal labyrinth 15 years earlier. Will she be back for the Foundation Gala? Connor asked. Wouldn't miss it. Your keynote speech is the main attraction. The Miller Foundation for Family Security had grown from Vaughn's initial funding into a global organization dedicated to protecting vulnerable families from predatory schemes. What began as justice for Pierce's victims had expanded into comprehensive programs for everything from financial security protocols to advanced medical monitoring systems. At the airfield, Marcus waited beside the jet. At 60, the former Delta operator had lost none of his alertness, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings from habit rather than immediate concern. As Sentinel's chief security officer, he had transformed the company's protective measures into an industry standard known as the Miller Protocol. The Tokyo team landed safely, Marcus reported as they approached. Demonstration for the Japanese Defense Ministry went perfectly. They're particularly interested in the new quantum encryption system. And our guests for tonight? Vaughn asked. Secured at the estate. Detective Reeves, Director Reeves, arrived an hour ago with the FBI delegation. Sadie Reeves had risen through the ranks to become director of the FBI's Specialized Financial Crimes Division, her career propelled by the successful prosecution of the Pierce-Pittman network. The case had revealed dozens of similar operations targeting wealthy individuals across the country, leading to a specialized task force that Reeves now commanded. During the 2-hour flight to their Virginia estate, Vaughn reviewed quarterly reports from Sentinel Horizon's various divisions. The company had grown beyond defense contracting to include civilian security systems, medical monitoring technology, and specialized educational programs, all outgrowths of the systems Vaughn had developed during his fight against Pierce and Layla. Sarah mentioned the Chinese delegation is pushing for access to the drone encryption protocols again, Connor noted, reviewing his own copy of the reports. 15 years later, they're still after the same technology. Some things never change, Vaughn replied, though their methods have become more sophisticated than simply trying to buy it from corrupt insiders. The estate came into view as they descended, 300 acres of rolling Virginia countryside surrounding a modern compound that balanced aesthetic beauty with unparalleled security. Glass walls offered panoramic views while incorporating ballistic materials. Gardens provided tranquility while concealing motion sensors and surveillance systems. The lake offered recreation while housing underwater detection grids. Gloria waited on the landing pad, her silver hair styled in the same precise bob she had maintained for decades. Her judicial robes had been replaced by an elegant suit that projected authority without ostentation. At 77, she remained as sharp as the day she had outmaneuvered Judge Novak to protect Connor's custody. The Attorney General arrived early. She informed them after greeting Vaughn with a kiss and Connor with a warm embrace. He's particularly interested in your presentation on cross-jurisdictional prosecution models. And our special guest? Vaughn asked quietly. Gloria's expression softened slightly. Arrived under secure transport an hour ago. Currently in the East Wing guest suite with psychological support staff as requested. This special guest represented the culmination of 15 years of careful planning. Trent Baxter, recently released after serving his full sentence, had agreed to participate in the Foundation's rehabilitation program. His testimony about the psychological manipulation techniques employed by Pierce and Layla had proven invaluable in developing preventative protocols. Inside the main house, staff prepared for the evening's private gala celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Miller Foundation. What had begun as a support network for Pierce's victims had evolved into a comprehensive organization addressing family security across multiple dimensions: financial, physical, psychological, and digital. In his office, Vaughn found Sarah Mason reviewing final security arrangements for the event. At 55, Sarah had transitioned from executive assistant to president of Sentinel's Civilian Security Division, overseeing applications of military-grade protection systems for vulnerable populations. The Secretary of Defense confirmed his attendance, she reported. And the live stream to our international chapters is tested and ready. Any word from the medical examiner? Vaughn asked, referring to Dr. Rebecca Chun, who had noticed the inconsistencies in the dental records of Vaughn's body double 15 years earlier. Arriving with the NIH delegation. Her forensic toxicology protocols have been implemented in 37 countries now. Sarah's expression turned solemn. She asked if she could visit the memorial wall before the main event. The memorial wall, a somber installation in the Foundation's main building, listed the names of all identified victims of similar schemes worldwide. What had begun with the 3 men killed by Pierce and Layla now documented over 200 cases spanning 2 decades. Of course, Vaughn agreed. Arrange private access for her. She deserves that recognition for her role. As evening approached, Vaughn made his way to the East Wing where Trent Baxter waited. 15 years in federal prison had aged the man considerably. Once handsome with the same charismatic features as his cousin Elaine, he now appeared gaunt, his movements hesitant as he stood to greet Vaughn. Mr. Miller, Trent began, his voice carrying the institutional flatness acquired during incarceration. Thank you for this opportunity. Many would consider me beyond redemption. Redemption isn't my concern, Vaughn replied honestly. Prevention is. Your insights into Pierce's methodologies and recruitment techniques have already improved our screening protocols. Trent nodded, accepting this pragmatic approach. I've reviewed the Foundation's materials. The Miller Protocol could have prevented dozens of cases if it had existed 20 years ago. That's why you're here. Your testimony about how Pierce identified and manipulated targets provides a psychological profile we couldn't develop otherwise. As they spoke, Vaughn studied the man who had once threatened his son. Prison had dissolved Trent's arrogance, replacing it with a wary humility that appeared genuine. Regular psychological evaluations during his incarceration had documented his gradual separation from Pierce's influence, a case study in deprogramming that now informed the Foundation's rehabilitation services. Have you told Connor I'm here? Trent asked, addressing the obvious tension. He knows. His decision whether to speak with you. Trent nodded. I understand. Please tell him I've prepared a formal apology, if he's willing to receive it. Not for forgiveness, but for accountability. Vaughn left Trent with the Foundation's psychological staff, and proceeded to the main hall where guests had begun to arrive. The room filled with government officials, corporate leaders, security experts, and most importantly, families who had been protected by the Foundation's work. Frank Morales arrived with his wife, his career having evolved from Westridge Academy's security chief to executive director of school safety for the National Education Association. The Miller Protocol had begun at Westridge, but now protected students in over 5,000 schools nationwide. Connor's defensive training program has been implemented in 43 states now, Frank reported proudly. Started with those lacrosse players at Westridge, and now it's standard curriculum. The program Frank referenced, Practical Defense for Young Adults, had grown from Connor's peer support group into a comprehensive system teaching teenagers to recognize and respond to potential threats. What began as Connor processing his own trauma had developed into a nationally recognized safety curriculum. Director Reeves arrived with her FBI team, her career having blossomed from the case that once nearly cost her job. The Financial Predation Task Force she commanded had become a model for specialized law enforcement, with Miller Protocol methodologies incorporated into standard FBI training. Our behavioral analysis team completed the Pierce-Pittman study, she informed Vaughn during their private conversation. 15 years of prison interviews with your former wife and her brother have yielded a comprehensive psychological profile. Any surprises? Vaughn asked. One significant finding. Their father appears to have been running similar schemes in Europe during the 1980s. We've connected him to at least 7 suspicious deaths of wealthy widows in Switzerland and Austria. This new information confirmed Vaughn's long-held suspicion that the siblings' operation had deeper roots than initially discovered. The intergenerational pattern explained their sophisticated methodology and comfort with extreme measures. We've also completed the final interviews with Pierce, Reeves continued, her expression grave. His terminal diagnosis has made him more forthcoming, though not remorseful. Warren Pierce's pancreatic cancer diagnosis 6 months earlier had created an unexpected opportunity for investigators. Facing death, he had begun revealing operational details previously withheld, though his fundamental sociopathy remained unchanged. And Elaine? Vaughn asked, still unable to use the name Layla for the woman who had shared his bed while plotting his death. Maintaining her isolation. Refuses most interviews except with approved researchers. The prison psychologist reports no meaningful rehabilitation progress. Unlike her brother, Elaine Pittman had retreated into a defensive silence during her incarceration, offering information only when it provided tangible benefits. Her sociopathic traits had evolved rather than diminished, adapting to prison life with the same calculated manipulation she had once employed in society. As the formal portion of the evening began, Vaughn took his place at the head table alongside Gloria, Connor, and the Foundation's executive leadership. The attendees represented 15 years of work transforming personal trauma into systemic protection for vulnerable individuals. Connor's keynote speech captured the essence of their journey, balancing personal experience with professional insight. 15 years ago, my father and I discovered that the greatest threats often hide behind the faces we trust most. What could have destroyed us instead became the catalyst for systems that now protect thousands of families worldwide. The Miller Protocol began as one man's fight to protect his son. Today, it represents our collective commitment to ensuring no child or family faces such betrayal without defense. As Connor spoke, Vaughn reflected on their parallel journeys from victims to advocates. His son had transformed from a frightened 14-year-old into a man who channeled his experience into protecting others, first through peer support, then through educational programs, and now through his leadership role in the Foundation. The evening progressed with presentations from various Foundation divisions, the medical monitoring initiative that had developed from Vaughn's self-testing for arsenic, the financial protection protocol that identified suspicious patterns in estate planning, the educational security framework that Frank Morales had pioneered, and the psychological recovery program that supported survivors of similar betrayals. After the formal presentations, Vaughn found a moment alone with Connor on the terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens. "You've seen the latest intelligence reports?" Vaughn asked, referring to the classified briefings they both received through their security clearances. Connor nodded. The Chinese military delegation that approached Senator Holbrook. Same technology they tried to buy from Pierce 15 years ago. Some threats evolve. Others simply persist, Vaughn observed. The quantum encryption system would be as valuable to them now as our drone protocols were then. Different players, same game, Connor agreed. Though their approach is more sophisticated than bribing a corrupt doctor. Their conversation reflected the ongoing vigilance that had become second nature after surviving Pierce's conspiracy. While the immediate danger had passed 15 years earlier, The experience had permanently altered their perception of security, both personal and national. As the gala concluded, Vaughn received a secure call from the federal medical facility where Warren Pierce was serving his multiple life sentences. The call came directly from the warden, bypassing standard protocols. "Mr. Miller, I regret to inform you that inmate Warren Pittman, also known as Warren Pierce, passed away at 9:42 p.m. Eastern Time. His cancer progressed more rapidly than anticipated." "I understand," Vaughn replied, his voice neutral. "Has his sister been notified?" "That process is underway. We wanted to inform you directly given the circumstances." After ending the call, Vaughn found Gloria in her study reviewing briefs for her upcoming Supreme Court appearance. "Pierce is dead," he stated simply. Gloria set aside her papers, studying his expression. "How do you feel about that?" "Indifferent," Vaughn answered truthfully. "He ceased being a threat 15 years ago. His death changes nothing." "Should we inform Connor?" "Tomorrow. Let him enjoy tonight's success without that shadow." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the estate had quieted, Vaughn stood in his private office reviewing the secure feeds from various properties, a habit maintained since the days when he had monitored Pierce's lake house. The systems showed Connor arriving safely at his campus apartment, Marcus completing final security checks, Sarah securing the foundation's data centers. A separate monitor displayed the Federal Women's Correctional Facility, where Elaine Pittman continued serving her 40-year sentence. The feed showed her being escorted to the warden's office, presumably to receive news of her brother's death. Her expression remained impassive as she received the information, her emotional detachment unchanged by 15 years of incarceration. Vaughn closed the feed, feeling no satisfaction or closure from Pierce's death or Elaine's continued imprisonment. The true victory had come not from their punishment, but from the systems created in response to their crimes. Protection extending far beyond one family to encompass thousands. The following morning, Vaughn met with the Foundation's research team to review implementation of the latest Miller Protocol updates. The team included psychologists, security experts, financial analysts, and medical specialists, a multidisciplinary approach reflecting the complex nature of the threats they addressed. The predictive model identified 3 potential targeting operations last quarter, reported Dr. Melissa Chun, daughter of the medical examiner who had first questioned Vaughn's death certificate. Interventions were successful in all cases, with potential victims secured and perpetrators under investigation. "Any pattern connections to known networks?" Vaughn asked. "One operation showed methodological similarities to the Pierce-Pittman approach," Dr. Chin confirmed, suggesting either knowledge transfer or independent development of similar techniques. The possibility that Pierce's methodologies had spread beyond his immediate operation had driven much of the Foundation's preventative work. By studying his techniques in detail, they had developed systems to identify similar schemes before they reached fruition. Later that afternoon, Connor arrived at the main house for their weekly strategic meeting. Since completing his PhD in behavioral psychology alongside his coaching career, Connor had become increasingly involved in the Foundation's research initiatives. "I heard about Pierce," he said as they settled in Vaughn's study. "Terminal cancer seems too easy an ending for what he did." "Justice isn't always poetic," Vaughn replied. "But his death doesn't diminish what we've built in response to his crimes." Connor nodded, absorbing this perspective. "I spoke with Trent before he left this morning." "How did that go?" "Strange," Connor admitted. Seeing him aged, diminished. He apologized for his role in what happened. Said he's been working with prison psychologists to understand how Pierce manipulated him. "Do you believe his rehabilitation is genuine?" Connor considered the question carefully. "I believe he's genuinely broken. Whether that translates to genuine redemption remains to be seen. The Foundation's monitoring protocols will track his reintegration." Their conversation reflected the balanced approach that had characterized their response to the conspiracy, neither vengeful nor naive, but pragmatically focused on prevention and protection. As evening approached, Vaughn received confirmation that Elaine had been informed of her brother's death. Prison officials reported no visible emotional reaction, though she had requested access to his personal effects, a request denied under the terms of their separation order. "She'll attempt to contact you now," Gloria predicted when Vaughn shared this information. Pierce's death removes her last psychological anchor to their shared identity. "The communication protocols remain in place," Vaughn assured her. "Any attempt will be redirected through proper channels." Those protocols had been established during the initial trials, when Elaine had attempted to manipulate proceedings through direct appeals to Vaughn's clemency. 15 years of consistent boundaries had limited her ability to extend psychological manipulation beyond her prison walls. The next morning brought the expected communication attempt, a letter routed through Elaine's prison counselor to the Foundation's legal department. Gloria reviewed it first, her judicial experience providing context for the manipulative techniques employed. Classic manipulation, she noted, passing the document to Vaughn, acknowledging her brother's death as a shared loss and suggesting a meeting for mutual closure. The psychological evaluation team should find this textbook. Vaughn scanned the letter, recognizing the calculated approach that had once charmed him during their courtship. The woman who had been his wife remained a skilled manipulator, though her tactics now appeared transparent against the backdrop of understanding developed over 15 years. Forward it to Dr. Chen's team, he decided. It adds to the behavioral profile. No response required. That afternoon, Vaughn visited the Sentinel Horizon headquarters for the quarterly board meeting. The corporation had grown from his initial defense contracting business into a global security enterprise with divisions spanning military, civilian, and governmental sectors. Sarah met him in the executive lobby, her position as division president having evolved from her initial role as his assistant. The Quantum Encryption Division passed final Defense Department certification, she reported as they walked toward the boardroom. Full implementation begins next month. And the vulnerability assessment? Vaughn asked, referring to the specific concerns raised by intelligence regarding Chinese interest in the technology. Marcus's team identified 3 potential access vectors. All have been secured with redundant protocols. The board meeting proceeded efficiently, with detailed updates from each division. Sentinel Horizon had maintained its position as the leading defense technology provider while expanding into civilian security applications derived from the Miller Protocol. As the meeting concluded, Vaughn received a secure message from Agent Keller, who had risen to Deputy Director of the FBI since handling the Pierce Pittman case 15 years earlier. The message contained a single line: "Package en route. Confirmation of our discussion." The package referenced intelligence from international operations that had tracked remnants of Pierce's network operating in Eastern Europe. After 15 years of monitoring, authorities had finally accumulated enough evidence to dismantle the operation completely. That evening, Vaughn and Gloria hosted a small dinner gathering with Connor, Sarah, Marcus, and Frank Morales, the core team that had helped navigate the conspiracy 15 years earlier. Though they now led different aspects of the security infrastructure that had grown from that experience, their shared history created a bond that transcended professional collaboration. To absent friends, Marcus proposed as a toast, acknowledging those who had contributed to their survival and success but were no longer present. From Vaughn's Delta Force commander, whose dying words had instilled the vigilance that saved his life, to Detective Chun, who had questioned the suspicious death certificate. As conversation flowed around the table, Vaughn observed the family that had formed from the ashes of betrayal. Gloria, whose legal brilliance had evolved into judicial wisdom. Connor, whose traumatic experience had sparked a career helping others develop resilience. Marcus, whose military loyalty had transferred seamlessly to corporate security. Sarah, whose intelligence background had created the information systems that now protected thousands. Frank, whose protection of one boy had expanded to safeguarding students nationwide. Pierce's network in Budapest has been contained, Vaughn informed them when the conversation turned to current operations. The final connections to his original methodology have been documented and neutralized. 15 years, Connor reflected. Almost as long as I knew the woman I thought was my mother. The observation hung in the air, a reminder of the deception that had shaped their lives. Elaine Pittman had spent 12 years posing as Layla Miller, wife and mother, while plotting Vaughn's death and Connor's disinheritance. The Foundation's work has identified 73 similar operations worldwide, Gloria noted, each using variations of the same approach, targeting isolated wealthy individuals through emotional manipulation before physiological elimination. And prevented twice that number from succeeding, Marcus added. The Miller Protocol's early warning system functions exactly as designed. After dinner, Vaughn and Connor walked through the illuminated gardens, their conversation turning to the Foundation's future. At 57, Vaughn had begun considering succession planning for both Sentinel Horizon and the Miller Foundation. The board position remains open whenever you're ready, Vaughn reminded his son. No pressure, but your psychological research would bring valuable perspective to our security applications. After the championship, Connor promised. I gave my word to these players. Their relationship had evolved from father and son to partners in the enterprise built from their shared trauma. Connor's dual career in sports psychology and security systems reflected the integration of protective principles into normal life, the balance Vaughn had sought since recognizing the poison in his coffee 15 years earlier. Later that night, Vaughn received confirmation that Warren Pierce's remains had been processed according to federal protocols for deceased inmates with no claiming relatives. With no religious preferences on record, His body had been cremated without ceremony, a stark contrast to the elaborate funeral Layla had planned for Vaughn 15 years earlier. The notification prompted Vaughn to access his secure archives, reviewing the original evidence that had exposed the Pierce Pittman conspiracy. The surveillance footage from his kitchen showing Layla measuring poison into his coffee, the medical records documenting his declining health, the hidden cameras capturing Pierce and Layla celebrating his imminent death. These records had been preserved not from vengeance, but as educational materials, case studies in the Foundation's training programs for identifying and responding to similar threats. The personal betrayal had been transformed into institutional knowledge protecting countless others. The following morning, Vaughn visited the Foundation's research facility where Dr. Chin's team analyzed Elaine's letter regarding her brother's death. Classic narcissistic response, Dr. Chin explained, highlighting passages on her display. No genuine grief, but recognition that his death alters her strategic position. The request for a meeting represents an attempt to establish a new manipulation vector now that their partnership is dissolved. Recommendations? Vaughn asked. Maintain complete communication restrictions. Her psychological profile shows increased risk of manipulative behavior following this destabilizing event. Vaughn nodded, trusting the assessment of the team that had studied the Pierce Pittman case for 15 years. Their understanding of the psychological dynamics had evolved from personal experience to scientific methodology, creating protection systems more sophisticated than any individual could develop alone. That afternoon, Connor called with news from the university. We've been selected to host the International Security Conference next spring. The athletic department is partnering with the Miller Foundation to showcase the campus safety protocols. Perfect timing with the new behavioral prediction models releasing, Vaughn noted. Your defensive training program would make an excellent demonstration. The conversation highlighted how seamlessly their various endeavors had integrated. Connor's coaching career, the Foundation's protective systems, Sentinel's security technologies, and the educational programs that grew from their experience. As evening approached, Vaughn met with Marcus to review the final security arrangements for Gloria's Supreme Court appearance the following week. Despite 15 years without direct threats, the habits of vigilance remained ingrained in their operations. Standard protocols plus additional monitoring at the hotel and courthouse, Marcus confirmed. Though the threat assessment remains minimal. Minimal isn't zero, Vaughn reminded him, the mantra that had guided their security philosophy since discovering Layla's betrayal. After Marcus departed, Vaughn spent a quiet evening with Gloria in their private quarters, discussing her upcoming case and the Foundation's latest initiatives. Their relationship had evolved from attorney-client to partners in building systems that protected others from the betrayal Vaughn had experienced. Pierce's death changes the psychological equation for Elaine, Gloria observed as they discussed the prison monitoring reports. With him gone, she loses both her accomplice and her audience. The Foundation's psychological team predicts increased manipulation attempts, Vaughn confirmed, though her options remain limited within the correctional system. 25 more years, Gloria noted. She'll be in her 80s when eligible for parole. By then, the Miller Protocol will have evolved beyond anything she could comprehend. The observation captured the essential victory they had achieved, transforming personal betrayal into protective systems that would outlast both the perpetrators and the victims. What Pierce and Elaine had intended as destruction had instead catalyzed creation on an institutional scale. Later that night, Vaughn stood at the window of his study, looking out over the estate illuminated by security lighting. The property embodied the balance he had sought since recovering from Elaine's poisoning. Comprehensive protection without paranoia, vigilance without fear. On his desk sat reports from the Foundation's global chapters, each implementing variations of the Miller Protocol tailored to local conditions. What had begun as one man's fight to protect his son had expanded into an international framework safeguarding thousands of vulnerable individuals and families. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, security assessments for Sentinel's quantum encryption deployment, succession planning for the Foundation's leadership, coordination with international law enforcement monitoring remnants of Pierce's network. But for tonight, Vaughn allowed himself a moment of reflection on the journey from victim to protector. The poison that had nearly killed him had instead catalyzed systems that saved countless others. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy his family had instead created a larger community dedicated to safeguarding the vulnerable. As he turned from the window, Vaughn caught sight of the framed photograph on his desk, Connor at 14, standing beside him during the first Miller Foundation Gala 15 years earlier. The boy's expression showed the determined resilience that had carried him through trauma to triumph. That resilience, more than any security system or protocol, represented the true victory over those who had tried to destroy them. In the face of calculated betrayal, they had responded with calculated protection, not just for themselves, but for all who might face similar threats. The Miller Protocol would continue evolving long after Warren Pierce and Elaine Pittman were forgotten. Their legacy of destruction had been transformed into a legacy of protection that would endure for generations to come. And in that transformation lay the most complete justice imaginable, the ultimate counterattack against those who had weaponized trust itself. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.